I moved into the house on Elm Street last spring. The first thing I loved was the wall of glass in the living room. Floor-to-ceiling panes ran from the fireplace to the back door. Morning light hit the stone floor, my sample boards, my tape measures. The previous owners built a small Japanese garden out back. Gravel lines, a maple, a lantern by a koi pond, a wooden gazebo near the rear fence. The fence was 6 feet and buried in dense bushes, so from the street the house felt closed off. I never felt watched. I liked that. My routine settled fast. Coffee at 7, emails, then fabric pulls across the dining table. I work from home as an interior designer, so light is my tool. I never closed the blinds. At night, the pond lights made ripples on the ceiling. The side gate had a latch that stuck down firm. If it moved, I would know. I checked it most mornings without thinking. I met a few neighbors. The mail carrier, a couple with terriers, the delivery guy who hated my driveway. Across the street was Linda, mid-50s, neat bob, floral tops, a metal sun on her porch post. We waved twice. That was it. I skimmed the pond, raked the gravel, trimmed the bushes. Everything felt contained. It felt private in a way I had never had before. Windows stayed clear at night. Small things did catch my eye. Twice I found tiny pebbles on the inside track of the slider, like grit had ridden in on the edge. One morning the gate latch sat up a hair, then dropped when I pressed it. The motion light clicked on near dawn. I told myself it was wind and wood and ignored it. One Thursday evening, just after sunset, the doorbell rang 3 times, sharp. I had a box cutter in my hand and a stack of samples on the coffee table. I set the blade down and opened the door. Linda stood there, angry. "You need to close your blinds," she said. "There are children on this street. You can't be indecent in front of children." I said I didn't understand. My windows faced my backyard. You could not see my living room from the street. She shook her head like I was playing dumb. "People can see," she said. "You're exposing yourself." The word hung in the entry. My TV was on mute. The pond filter hummed. Her perfume was powdery. I told her my property was fenced, and the windows looked only at my garden. I said I worked here and needed the light. I didn't want to argue on my doorstep. She stared past me at the glass like it offended her. A breeze moved leaves along the curb. She repeated that I was indecent, said other people were talking. I said I would be mindful, but I wasn't doing anything wrong. She stepped back off my mat. She crossed the street without looking. I closed the door and looked at the windows until the TV's bright scene showed faint streaks on the outside pane. They could have been water spots. I pressed my palm to the glass and watched a new mark bloom and fade. I locked the slider, checked the gate latch. I worked late. I kept half an ear tuned for the motion light. It did not click. At 10, I washed my mug, wiped the counter, shut down the laptop, and looked into the yard. The pond light glowed. The gravel still ran straight. The next day around 5, the doorbell rang once. I had a client mood board on the floor, samples pinned to foam. I opened the door. Linda took a half step into my entry without asking. She lifted her phone. "I said you need blinds," she said, and pushed the screen toward me. The photo on her phone was my living room, taken through my windows, my sofa, my rug, the coffee table with the box cutter still on it. In the background, through the same glass, were the pond and the gazebo roofline. The image was tilted and grainy, but it was my house. "How did you take that?" I asked. "From where?" She didn't answer. She swiped. Same view, later light. The patio strip was on along the eave. "You need blinds immediately," she said, "for the sake of the children." I said the only way to capture my yard in the same frame was to be behind my house or in my yard. I asked again where she stood when she took the pictures. She lifted her chin and repeated that I was indecent. I said I wanted the location. If she had been on my property, I needed to know. She frowned and told me I was being difficult when she was trying to protect the neighborhood. She swiped to another image and held it so close I could not see the edges. I repeated the question. I kept my hands still so I didn't grab the phone. Sun through the door glass traced a stripe on the tile. Outside, a delivery van rolled past. No one else was on the street. The street stayed quiet while we faced off. She did not leave. "You're selfish," she said. "You don't care who sees what." I said my living room faced an enclosed yard. I said her photos showed my yard, which meant the shots were taken from behind me, not from the street. I asked a third time where she had been. Her voice went up. She said families had complained. She said light cut through houses. She said not everyone wanted to see my life through glass. I told her physics did not change my fence. I asked her to answer the question instead of repeating herself. Her cheeks flushed. Her fingers tightened around the phone until the case creaked. Then she pointed the phone at my chest and claimed I was being unreasonable and selfish. I started with public records and old listings. The real estate photos showed the same windows wide open in every shot. Comments on a neighborhood forum from 2 years ago said, "The Davis garden is so pretty on the walk to the bus." I asked the mail carrier if kids used my yard. He said they used to cut through from the side gate to the next street to hit the bus stop faster. The Davis family let them. It saved a minute. It wasn't for me to judge what they agreed to, but it wasn't my agreement. I saw Linda on her porch that afternoon. I walked across with a printed map of my lot lines and said, calm and polite, that I understood why she might think the shortcut was still okay, but it wasn't. I said I was sorry for the change, but it was my property, and I did not want anyone coming through the gate. I added that I had tools and samples in the living room and I worked odd hours. She stared at my map like it was a trick. Her jaw tensed. She said I was rude and not a team player. She said the shortcut kept kids safe. I pointed out the sidewalk ran straight to the bus stop in less than 5 minutes. She said, "I'm calling the police," and turned her back on me. I told her fine, we could talk to them. I ordered a security camera kit that night. 4 outdoor cameras, 1 doorbell camera, 1 motion flood with a camera, and a small NVR box with a hard drive. I mounted 2 on the back eave pointing at the pond and gazebo, 1 on the side gate, and 1 above the slider facing the glass. I set the alert sensitive and turned on the microphone. I marked the gate with a piece of tape at the latch so I could see if it lifted. I didn't sleep much. At 3 a.m., an alert pinged. The backyard camera caught a cat moving along the fence. I saved the clip anyway. By noon the next day, the pattern was obvious. At 7:42 a.m., the side gate latch lifted. The tape line moved. The gate opened 6 inches. A person in a denim jacket slipped in and closed it quietly. She crossed my gravel edging and stood in the grass just outside the patio slab. She faced the windows and lifted her phone. She stood still for 1 minute, 38 seconds. The microphone picked up pond water and the faint click of her case. Then she left through the same gate. At 4:11 p.m., the same person came back. She stood at the gazebo's post and aimed into my living room. She did not step onto the patio, like she knew where my camera might be. It was Linda. The camera in daylight caught her hair and glasses. In one clip, she stared at her screen and adjusted angle until the glare dropped. When she tilted left, the gazebo roof showed, same as her photos. The NVR stamped months of recordings, because the date overlay proved the cameras had been recording since I installed them that morning. But the pattern of time of day and posture let me match what she showed me before. She had been doing this for months, I realized, because her earlier photos had snow on the lantern roof and the maple bear. She had been entering my yard at all times, sometimes just standing still, pointing at my windows like I was a display. I exported the clips to a thumb drive and labeled them by time. I kept my front door locked. I kept the blinds open anyway. I placed a small sign on the inside of the gate that read, "No trespassing. Cameras in use." I didn't expect it to stop her, but it set a line I could point to later. Linda followed through on her threat the next week. Late morning, a patrol car rolled to the curb. The officer was mid-40s, name tag Johnson, sunburn on his neck. He walked up slow, hands relaxed. He said my name and said there was a complaint of indecent exposure. Linda stood on her porch, arms folded, chin high. 2 houses down, a man watering his lawn paused. I invited Officer Johnson inside. The living room looked the same as always. Canvas bins under the table, sample books stacked, tape measure on the runner. The windows faced the garden. I told him the windows faced only my fenced yard. I told him what Linda had shown me on her phone earlier and how the background in those photos could only be captured from inside my lot because the pond and gazebo sat behind the camera. He asked to see what I had. I showed him the thumb drive and played the clips on my TV from the NVR. He watched the gate lift at 7:42 a.m. He watched Linda step in and raise her phone. He watched her stand and record. He asked to walk the yard. We went out together. He looked at the fence height, the angle from the gazebo to the glass, and the distance to the street. He stood at the gate and peered through the slats. You could not see my sofa from there. He stood in the exact spot where Linda had stood and lined up his gaze with the edge of the window. "That's the shot," he said. He made a note. He went to speak with Linda. I stayed on my porch and heard pieces of it. He asked her how she obtained the photos. She said she didn't have to answer. He asked again. She said she was protecting children. She said I was flashing people. He asked her if she had ever entered my yard. She said no at first, then said the gate was always open before, so she thought it was fine. He asked to see her phone. She refused, then held it out and pulled it back, then handed it over. He scrolled. He asked dates. He asked times. He walked back across to me and asked, quietly, if I wanted to press charges for trespass. I said I wanted it documented, and I wanted the behavior to stop. He called her over. Her face was red. She started talking fast. She called me a prostitute. She said I got surgery to get attention. She said I was running a business out of my house as a front. None of that matched the images in her hand. Officer Johnson told her to stop. He told her the photos were taken from inside my property. He told her she did not have permission to enter. He opened her phone gallery and deleted the album of my living room in front of her. He told her he was issuing a formal warning for harassment and trespassing. He turned to me and said to keep the footage and to call if she crossed onto my property again. He wrote a case number on his card and gave it to me. For 3 days, she stayed on her porch. The cameras recorded only cats and birds. Then the door knocking started up and down the block. She went door to door in the late afternoon with a clipboard. She spent 5 minutes per house. When I took out the trash, I heard my name and blinds and kids. That night, a neighbor I barely knew texted me a photo of a flyer. Protect our children. Petition for window coverings on Elm. The line at the bottom said, Organizer, Linda M. The next week, my business profile online showed 3 new 1-star reviews from accounts with no friends and stock photos. They said I was unprofessional and inappropriate. They said I made them uncomfortable. One said I dressed in a way that was not family-friendly. I screenshot everything. I emailed the platform and filed reports. I added a sidebar on my website with a calm statement about my services and appointment-only policy. I called my past clients and explained briefly that there was a situation with a neighbor and asked them to ignore the noise. They were polite. The mailbox notes started the third week. At first, they were typed. Close your blinds. People talk. Then one in pen. This is your last notice. I installed a locking mailbox with a slot and put a camera on it too. I printed every note and put them in a binder with the dates. I called Officer Johnson and updated the case. He told me to get a lawyer and consider a restraining order. I did. The lawyer's office felt practical. We sat with a paralegal and made a stack. The gate clips, the pond clips, the porch camera clips, the screenshots of fake accounts, the reviews, the flyers, and the notes. We drafted a petition citing harassment, stalking, and trespassing, and requested a temporary restraining order. The courthouse clerk stamped the paperwork and gave me a date for a hearing 2 weeks out. A process server delivered the papers to Linda. The porch camera caught her take them and rip the envelope, then pace in a small circle, then throw the papers on her chair and sit down with her head in her hands. Almost every day before the hearing, she found a new audience. She talked to the dog walker, the high school runners, the lawn guys. She pointed at my house in quick jerks. I kept the blinds open during the day and closed them at night. I moved my desk away from the windows to avoid being part of a show for whoever she gathered. I worked. I set alarms on the cameras and let the system log the quiet. 2 nights before the hearing, my porch camera recorded a hand reaching for the mailbox and pulling back when the lock resisted. The next morning, a note lay on the porch mat under a small rock. It said, "People are watching you." I picked it up with gloves and slid it into a page protector. I recorded the pickup, the envelope, and the time. I added it to the binder. At the hearing, Linda spoke fast and tangled. She said I was a problem. She said the neighborhood had standards. The judge asked her to stick to facts. My lawyer presented the clips and the photos and the notes. We showed the angles, the fence, the timestamps. The judge granted the temporary restraining order and set conditions. No contact, no trespassing, no approaching my property, no attempts to capture images through my windows. He warned her that any violation would result in arrest. She stared at the table and did not look at me. After that, the door knocking stopped. The fake accounts slowed. A legitimate client emailed to say she had seen the reviews and reported them. The cameras went back to catching cats and birds. I kept the binder out. I kept the sign on the gate. I kept my routines tight. The house felt different, not because of the glass, but because I watched it like a job. It was a plain boundary issue that should have taken one conversation to fix. Instead, it showed me how far someone will go to keep control over something that was never theirs in the first place. What started as a simple boundary issue revealed a disturbing pattern of stalking and harassment that made me question the safety of my own home. When I was 11, thunderstorms kept me awake. In late summer, they rolled over Omaha and shook our walls all night. Lightning flashed every few seconds, lighting the backyard blue. I gave up on sleep around 1, closed my bedroom door, and turned on my old Nintendo. The TV hummed and cast a glow on the carpet. I sat cross-legged and tried to ignore the storm. The controller cord tugged at my knee. Rain hammered the screen in my window like gravel. The house smelled like wet dirt. Every time lightning hit, the TV showed my face for an instant. I paused and rubbed my eyes. The thunder moved off and came back like footsteps. I got up and went to the window. My room looked over our backyard. The porch light was off, and everything was just shapes until lightning hit. Our garden shed sat by the chain-link fence. My dad had built it with a small square window so he could see his tools. In daylight, you could see the red toolbox and the rake hooks. The next flash lasted longer. That's when I saw the man. He stood near the shed with his shoulders hunched, a dark jacket stuck to his arms. He was tall with a hood up. His head was tilted toward the tiny window like he was listening. The light went out, and he vanished. Another flash put him there again, face bleached white before the dark swallowed him. I didn't know him. I dropped down without thinking. The TV behind me threw a rectangle on my closet doors. I reached back and hit the power button. The click felt loud. I slid to the sill and kept my head low. The man reached for the shed handle. It didn't move. My dad always locked it. He pressed his palm to the wood, then stepped back and turned slowly. Rain fell in sheets off the gutter. Water ran along the flagstones. He walked around the shed with one hand on the wall, checking the hinges and trim. He stood on his toes to see the top gap. My hands were steady on the sill. I told myself to watch and not do anything dumb. At 11, I still thought maybe I was overthinking. Maybe he was just stuck outside. He stayed. He didn't hide from the lightning. He timed his steps so he moved in the dark between flashes. I started counting that rhythm. Flash, still framed near the fence. Darkness, 3 steps. Flash, head down. Darkness. A pause like he was listening for a dog. It was 1:15 when I saw him. By 1:45 he was still there and the rain didn't let up. I locked my window and set the little dowel my dad kept in the track. I pulled the curtains together and left a finger-wide slit so I could see. I looped my controller cord and set it aside so I wouldn't trip. Then I went back to the slit and watched. I kept my breath off the glass. He left the shed and moved to the fence line. He kept tight to the maple shadow. When the next long flash came, he was at the bottom of the porch steps. He checked the screen door with his fingers. My mom latched it from the inside. He didn't yank it. He leaned in and put his ear near the glass. Then he stepped down and edged along the house toward the kitchen. I slid to the far side of my window to see the side yard. The concrete path shone like a ribbon. Trash cans sat under the eaves with water wringing off the lids. I watched the ladder my dad kept beside the window well. Lightning cracked and gave me a bright look. The hose, the grill cover, the downspout spilling. The next flash showed him at the back corner, closer to the kitchen window. The rain eased and the thunder moved off. I heard a car on the main road, our air conditioner clicking off, the drip at the gutter. I thought about running to my parents' room. The stairs were loud and the hallway opened above the living room. If he was near the glass, he could hear my feet. I stayed low and watched behind the curtain. He checked the basement window well with his shoe. He crouched and picked at the rusted grate. It didn't budge. He stood and looked up at the kitchen window with his chin tucked in. Lightning drew a sharp line across his face and showed a cap under the hood. He didn't move like a drunk. He moved like someone who wanted to know how the house was built. He listened again with his head tilted and his body still. When lightning came, he didn't flinch. He seemed to use it. He was careful about the angles, about where he stood in relation to the street, about the porch post blocking sight lines. It felt planned. He waded through a long stretch of dark and then stepped close to the siding under the kitchen window. He flattened to the wall. Cold came through the glass. I wiped away fog with my sleeve. I kept a clear view of the white frame and the tear in the screen my mom had taped last month. The caulk had a hairline crack my dad said he would fix when it was dry. The man lifted his face toward the window like it was a target he needed to study. He shifted each foot like he was settling in. The rain dripped off his hood in a steady line. He didn't look toward the street or the neighbors. He kept his head down, tight to the glass. I watched his hands come up in the next flash, elbows out, wrists stiff, and then he pressed both palms to the kitchen window and made a tight circle with his fingers, cupping his hands against the glass to block the reflection. He moved from the kitchen window to the sliding patio door like he had a plan. I saw his outline in the glass. He put his hand on the handle and jiggled it slowly like he was listening for the catch. Then he pressed his shoulder into the frame to test it. The door shivered, but the bar my dad kept in the track held firm. He crouched and looked at the bottom rail, then the top. He ran a finger along the weather strip like he was feeling for a gap. He tried the handle again, quick this time, and then pushed in short bursts, like he was testing the screws. I didn't wait for more. I slid away from the window, picked up my controller so it wouldn't click under my foot, and opened my bedroom door as careful as I could. The hallway was dark. The carpet was thick and hid my steps, but the stairs creaked if you didn't choose the right edge. I kept to the side and held the rail. Lightning lit the stairwell and the family pictures for a second. I paused and listened. The house groaned and the rain slapped the glass. I heard the little rattle of the patio door again. I moved faster. I went into my parents' room and put a hand on my dad's shoulder and shook. He woke with a jerk, and I whispered, "There's a man at the back door." My mom sat up. Dad was already reaching for his phone on the nightstand. He didn't ask me to repeat it. He thumbed 911 and spoke low. He asked for police, gave our address, said there was an intruder at the patio. He hung up and said, "Stay in here. Lock the door. Don't move." He put on his shoes without socks, grabbed the big black flashlight from the dresser, and slipped a jacket over his t-shirt. He didn't go through the kitchen. He went out the front door. I heard the deadbolt turn and the door ease shut. I went to their window and pushed a slat in the blind to see the front lawn. The rain had eased a little and street water ran in a line by the curb. I saw his flashlight come on at the porch, a tight white circle on the steps. He went down and around the side yard where the trash cans were, aiming the light low to the ground. I left the window and locked the bedroom door and stood with my mom. We listened. The storm drummed on the roof and the gutters. Then I heard the side gate hinge squeak, and a second later I saw a gray glow in the hallway from the backyard beam cutting across the kitchen. My mom whispered, "He called the police. It's okay." I nodded. I watched the crack under the bedroom door like it could tell me something. I counted to 20 and then 30. The next thing I heard was fast steps on the deck and the flashlight beam jumping on the ceiling by the kitchen. Dad was on the patio. He swept the light across the glass, across the table, across the grill cover. He opened the slider an inch and said, "Hello?" into the rain. He stood there and listened. The yard was empty. The man was gone. The beam slid to the fence line, then to the shed, then to the side yard again. Nothing moved. The police came in about 10 minutes. We heard tires on wet road and a door thump. Red and blue reflected off the living room ceiling. Someone knocked and called out, and my dad let them in. 2 officers went straight to the back with their lights and walked the edge of the lawn and the flower bed. Another drove slowly down the alley with a spotlight, stopping at each gate. I watched from the hall, behind my dad's shoulder. They found wet footprints on the deck boards, heel-to-toe prints leading right up to the slider. You could see the water darken the wood in foot shapes. A pair of prints sat turned sideways at the kitchen window, exactly where I had seen him stand. The officer measured a shoe with his hand and said it looked like a 10 or 11. He shined on the shed and tried the lock. The shackle had fresh scratches. The latch plate had a nick in the paint that wasn't there last week. Officer Martinez took notes and asked my dad for the timeline. He asked me what I saw and which way the man moved. I told him about the shed first, then the basement window well, then the kitchen, then the slider. He looked at the prints and nodded. He said, "We've been looking for someone like this. Several attempts in the last month, all in storms. He said the guy checked fences, sheds, basements, then windows. He said the noise let him cover his mistakes. Patrol cars rolled down the block with lights off and spotlights moving across yards. We watched one officer talk to the neighbor across the alley under a porch light. The rain weakened to a spray. My dad made coffee he didn't drink. The house smelled like wet jackets and mud. Mom sat on the couch with a throw blanket around her shoulders. I stayed near the patio door and stared at the prints until they blurred out with more rain. About an hour later, the phone rang. Martinez picked it up on speaker, and we all heard another officer say they had a male detained 3 blocks away near the elementary school field. He was soaked, wearing a dark jacket, carrying a small pry bar, a folding knife, and a flathead screwdriver wrapped in tape. They were bringing him in. Martinez wrote down a name, Ray Thompson. He said he knew the name. Local guy. Alcohol problems. Prior attempted break-ins and petty theft. He explained again why storms worked for him, how he waited for thunder to try a latch or crack something so neighbors didn't hear. They took more photos and bagged a piece of paint that had chipped off the shed latch in case it matched the pry bar. One officer walked the alley again and looked in the wet dust for tread marks. Then they cleared the house, checked each door and window, told us to keep the bar and the slider overnight, and left a card. Martinez said they'd call with updates and told my dad to call if anything else looked off. A week later, we heard the formal charges. Attempted burglary. He pled out. The judge gave him 6 months in county and mandatory alcohol treatment after release. My dad read the notice at the kitchen table. We didn't talk much about it. My parents had a security company out by Friday. They put contacts on every window and a panel by the garage door. We got a motion light over the patio that snapped on, even if a raccoon skittered the fence. My dad kept the flashlight on the dresser after that and added another bar to the basement door. The shed got a new lock and a heavier hasp. On storm nights after that, I didn't play Nintendo late. I shut my blinds and checked the dowel in the track and listened to the weather like it could tell me what was coming. If thunder rolled, I watched the clock and the windows. I kept my steps light on the stairs. I paid attention to small things, like how the air felt colder near the glass or a drip that changed speed. People say kids imagine things. That night wasn't imagination. It was simple, visible steps. A man at a shed, a man at a window, a hand on a door. He was almost in. That was the part that stayed with me. If the bar wasn't in the track, if I hadn't looked out at that moment, if my dad had slept 10 minutes more, the slider would have eased open and the kitchen tile would have clicked under wet shoes. Years later, I still think about that circle of his hands on the glass and the way he tested the frame like he was checking a blueprint. I think about the footprints drying on the boards and how they lined up with my view from the hallway. I don't try to dramatize it. It was just a man and a house and a storm. He used the weather. We used locks and a phone. I was 11, but I recognized the pattern fast enough to act. That became a habit. I trust the small signals now. I don't argue with the feeling that something is wrong. It isn't fear. It's a checklist. Window locked, door barred, porch light on, keep quiet, call for help, watch. And when the sky turns the backyard into a flash photo and the gutters roar, I remember the angle of his shoulder on the glass and the way he cupped his hands to see inside. Last year, I was driving my pickup from Phoenix to Las Vegas around midnight. It was a routine run, quieter than daytime. The desert pressed against the glass. The AC rattled in my old truck. Gas station coffee sat in the cup holder. Sunflower seeds were on the passenger seat. The road ran dark and straight, reflectors blinking like metronomes. I kept a few miles over the limit and held it steady. A gray sedan showed up in my rearview mirror not long after I passed the last busy exit. Two steady headlights, nothing flashy. It sat back there at a polite distance and stayed put. I didn't give it a second thought. That stretch gets late traffic. Truckers, people in rental cars, workers deadheading home. The lane lines hummed under my tires. The green signs slid past, and I chewed seeds and spit into a cup. The night felt normal, just empty asphalt and the quiet rumble of the engine. After about an hour, the car was still there in the exact same spot behind me. The distance looked fixed, like someone had measured it. About 50 feet. I nudged my speed up and watched the mirror. The sedan rose with me and reset to the gap. I eased down. It sank with me and still held 50 feet. It wasn't drama. It was precision, like a tape measure between us. We came up behind a slow semi on a long grade. The left lane was wide open. I slipped off the gas and settled behind the trailer. The gray sedan did the exact same thing. It could have gone left and around both of us. It didn't. When the road leveled and I signaled to pass, the sedan signaled too. When I slid back right, it slid back right. That's when I paid close attention and a cold feeling showed up. I flipped the mirror to night mode and back, trying to catch a clean look at the driver through the glare. No luck. I saw a pale dashboard and a shape at the wheel. No phone glow, no movement, no change. I ran through simple reasons to explain it. Tired driver, cruise control, someone nervous about passing at night. Then I tried a lane change that made no sense, just to see. I moved left, waited 10 seconds, then moved right again. The sedan copied me as if we shared a steering column. I told myself to be calm and watch the road. My eyes went mirror to lane to shoulder and back again. The desert was flat and black, with low hills like sleeping animals on both sides. A coyote blinked from the gravel and vanished. The radio felt too loud, so I turned it down until it was only a murmur. The left lane stayed mostly empty, clean and inviting. The gray car never touched it unless I did. Every move I made, it matched. The distance didn't change. 50 feet. Always 50 feet. I decided to test my suspicion properly. I started making random lane changes that a normal driver wouldn't mirror. I signaled left, moved over, held for a count, then signaled right and tucked behind a tanker. The sedan mirrored me exactly, blink for blink. I drifted a hair toward the shoulder before committing to a pass, then punched the gas to clear 2 rigs in a row. The sedan did the same pass, same timing, same settle. It never tried to pass me, never faded back, never chose a different path. I kept it up. I used clusters of trucks like a maze and threaded through their gaps. I accelerated harder than I liked, and then eased back down in stages. The gray car kept perfect pace, like a metronome glued to my bumper. It swelled in the mirror when I sped up and dropped back when I slowed, always refinding the same space. No horn, no flash, no gesture. It felt less like a person, and more like a rule was controlling it. Stay behind him, hold 50 feet, do what he does. 30 minutes slid by like that. My dash clock rolled past 1 in the morning. The highway opened long and straight. A faint dome of light showed far ahead. I pretended to take an exit. I drifted toward a ramp until my tires whispered on the dots, then eased back. The gray car shaded toward the ramp when I did, and eased back with me. I tried it again at the next ramp. Same result. It felt deliberate, not lazy and not random. I couldn't see their face through the windshield, but I could tell their attention was locked on my truck. The head stayed level. The car never wobbled. The posture didn't slump. I checked their passenger seat when a lit overpass gave me a flash of light. No second person that I could see. The plate was unreadable in the glare. It was all clean and neat and controlled. It looked like someone had trained to do exactly this and nothing else. That idea sat heavy in my chest while the miles kept coming. My fingers left damp patches on the wheel. The vinyl felt slick. I wiped one hand on my jeans, then the other, and kept my inputs small. I thought about tapping the brakes to force a choice, but I pictured a rear end in the dark or a road rage mess. I thought about flooring it, but my old truck hates the high 90s, and there were no shoulders. I kept testing without being stupid. I leaned into steady speed changes instead. I took 2 miles to creep up, 2 miles to creep down. Each time the gray car adapted without lag and landed back on that same invisible mark. I moved close to the right line for a minute, and then to the left line for a minute. It matched both positions like a shadow. The left lane stayed open and black. The driver refused to take it. The pattern was full and clean by then. It wasn't a mistake and it wasn't nerves. It was copy and follow, nothing else. The last test was simple. I eased off the gas and let the truck coast without touching the brakes. The left lane was empty. The road ahead was clear. I watched the needle drop and the gray car float with me, inch for inch, holding that gap welded in place. My hands sweated on the wheel as the truth finally clicked, and I realized this was intentional stalking behavior. I took the next exit that promised a small town. The sign showed a gas symbol and a diner fork. The ramp curved down into a darker road lined with scrub and a broken fence. The gray sedan rolled off the interstate right behind me. No hesitation. I kept going because turning back onto the highway felt worse. I watched for neon or bright lots. I saw a few dim streetlights and a billboard with half the bulbs out. The road angled away from the highway and dipped under a short bridge. I expected a main street with a station on the corner. Instead, the lane markers got faint and the poles got farther apart. The map app on my dash was useless without service. The only light came from my headlights, and the glass windshield reflected my own face back at me. The sedan stayed at the same 50-foot mark. I tested my brake lights with a light tap to see if they reacted. They eased with me and kept the leash tight. No other cars were around. The road bent right past a field with a dry irrigation ditch. I took the turn because going straight looked like a dead end with a chain-link gate. The sedan turned right too. After that, there were no houses, no porch lights, just open land and small trees hunched low from wind. The two-lane narrowed to cracked asphalt. The center line vanished in broken yellow dashes, then nothing. I kept speed steady to avoid a breakdown on bad pavement. Gravel kicked at my fenders. I scanned for a gas station canopy or a diner sign. Nothing. I checked for a cell bar. 0. The phone said, "No service," in small letters. I tried raising it high like an idiot, then put it back. The sedan's headlights ran in my mirror like twin holes punched in the dark. I took another right when a sign pointed to County Road 8. Smaller road, maybe a loop back. The sedan followed. I pictured a trap at a hidden turnout. I kept space around me and watched the shoulders for anything parked. The shoulder narrowed to dirt ruts. The asphalt turned to a patchy layer with weeds pressing through the cracks. The truck bounced and rattled. I slowed to avoid blowing a tire. The sedan slowed in the same way. No horn, no lights flash, just steady. I tried a sudden left onto a farm lane that cut between two fields. My tires popped rocks. The sedan came to, unbothered by the rough surface. A rusty gate stood open ahead. A sign lay face down in the weeds. I went through and kept moving because stopping felt wrong. The sky looked bigger out here, and the highway noise was gone. It was only engine, tires, and occasional animals moving in the brush. The sedan stuck behind me like it was connected by steel cable. I had no plan except keep moving and don't dead end. I checked the fuel gauge. It leaned closer to a quarter tank. I worked the next set of turns faster, choosing random directions, swinging left onto a gravel connector and then right onto a paved strip that climbed a little hill. Dust blew across my windshield even with windows up. I watched the needle on the fuel gauge drop, not fast, but it moved. I tried to read the shape behind me. No door dings, no bumper stickers. Clean car. That alone set my teeth on edge out here where dust touches everything. It kept the same spacing, same lane line, like a measuring tool. The game dragged on for 15 minutes. I tracked time off the dash clock. I cut into farm paths that ran along irrigation canals. The truck bumped over culverts. The sedan handled it fine. I looped twice, thinking I had doubled back, then saw a water tower that told me I had not. The driver behind me made no mistake. Every intersection was a mirror of my choice, and every small test I made, they matched. The fuel gauge slid toward the last eighth. I clicked off the AC to save a little. I killed the radio to hear the engine. The night grew thinner with sound because I strained for anything out of place. A coyote yipped once far out. Wind hit the cab and quit. The sedan never wavered. I started counting turns to keep orientation. Left, right, right, straight, right. I pictured the highway as a line to the west and tried to bend toward it. The road ahead split near an old barn with a sagging roof and a rusted tin ridge cap. One door hung crooked, and weeds shoved under the boards. A dead tractor sat half-sunk by a fence. The fork came at a shallow angle, 2 asphalt strips with grass down the center. I took the right because the stars looked more open in that direction, and I guessed the highway was that way. My blinker clicked and reflected off the barn's metal sheet, dull and weak. The gray sedan closed to the fork, and without slowing in a strange way, turned left. No drift, no fake. It just went left. I watched the taillights in my mirror. They shrank and vanished between 2 lines of trees. I rolled 100 yards, slowed, and stopped on my side of the fork with my foot hard on the brake. The road behind me was empty. The barn creaked once and went quiet. My cab ticked as heat moved in the metal. I sat there and listened for any engine out in the dark. Nothing. I thought about turning around and following to see if they were hiding with lights off. I didn't. I thought about killing my headlights and waiting. I didn't. I clicked into drive and went on the right fork, slow, scanning the ditches and the fence lines. The sudden silence built pressure under my ribs. The pursuit had been simple. This was not. I drove for another 30 minutes through back roads and field lanes before a big green sign finally showed on the horizon. The edge of the interstate cut across the dark like a river of dull light. I found a ramp with cracked concrete and a faded arrow and took it. The merge lane was empty. I rolled back up to highway speed and watched the mirrors until my eyes ached. The rest of the run to Las Vegas stayed quiet. Trucks spaced themselves like islands. Occasional rental cars ran fast and disappeared. The dashed white lines kept a steady rhythm. I looked for the gray sedan every time a pair of headlights came up behind me. I marked model shapes and grille patterns. None matched. I kept my speed careful and left plenty of room in front of me. The fuel light came on near the state line, and I picked a busy station with bright pumps to fill up. I finished the drive and parked at my hotel before dawn. The sky was a flat gray blue. I locked the truck twice and walked the lot once to check for that car. I looked at every gray sedan. None of them were it. I watched the street a minute longer and then went inside to check in. The desk kid pushed over a key card and nodded at my ID. My hands were steady by then, but I kept seeing those tail lights shrinking away at the fork. I never found out who was in that car or why they glued themselves to my bumper for that long. I went over every choice and didn't see what set it off. The whole thing stayed plain, like a job someone had to do. The only thing I could control after was what I did next time. Now when I drive late, I tell someone my route and the time I expect to get where I'm going. I stick to main exits, big stations, and the lanes with more light. I keep more fuel in the tank, and if someone holds at my bumper and copies me, I keep moving toward people and cameras, and I make the call as soon as I see a bar appear on my phone. When Noah started that genealogy project senior year, I thought it was just another excuse to skip practice. He liked old records, old names. He dug through school databases and ancestry sites at lunch. One day he slid his Chromebook toward me and said he found my last name in an old newspaper. The headline was from 2002 about disappearances in our town. The main suspect had my last name. 4 people, all between 2001 and 2003, last seen near the industrial area. That was where my dad's auto repair shop used to be. The article said police suspected my Uncle Frank, but never had enough to charge him. After that, the case went cold. Noah kept saying it was probably a coincidence. There are a lot of families with the same name as mine. But the dates bothered me. Those years lined up with my early childhood. I remembered the smell of hot rubber and the clang of impact wrenches, the cracked asphalt outside the bays, the freight tracks behind the fence. Faces I couldn't fully place moved through my head like quick shadows. I wanted to shrug it off, to laugh at myself, but I couldn't. Something about that headline sat under my skin. We printed the article in the library after school. The toner left gray bands across the page. I stuffed the sheet in my backpack and walked home the long way so I could pass the old industrial road. The buildings were low, square blocks of concrete with faded logos. My dad's old shop was still there, the windows painted black from the inside. A rusted sign hung crooked from 2 loose bolts. I stood on the sidewalk with my backpack straps digging into my shoulders and listened to trucks downshift on the highway. I didn't go closer. I told myself I'd just look into it a little. Then I told Noah I wanted to research more. He shrugged and said he'd help. I said I could do it. Part of me didn't want to know, but I decided to research further anyway. I started going to the town library after classes and on weekends. It was quiet and smelled like dust and copier paper. The librarian showed me the microfilm machine and the drawer of old reels. I spent weeks rolling through years of police blotters and local articles, my eyes going watery from the flicker. When my friends went to games, I went to the archive room. I made a list in a cheap spiral notebook. Names, ages, dates. I checked them twice. All 4 victims were young adults. 2 men, 2 women. Each had been reported missing by their families. Each had been seen near our family's garage before they disappeared. One was a parts runner who made deliveries on Friday afternoons. One worked at a sandwich shop nearby and used to eat lunch on the curb in the shade of the body shop next door. A witness saw her talking to a man outside the bay doors, and then never saw her again. A third had broken down at the corner by the freight tracks. A tow ticket in the paper placed him at our shop that same evening. The last one parked her car in the cul-de-sac behind the warehouse and left her purse on the passenger seat. The police reports were worse than the articles. They were clipped and precise. They talked about the industrial lots, the pallets stacked along the alley, tire piles that held rainwater and flies. One line said officers observed suspicious stains in the rear service bay. Another said there was disturbed soil behind the property near an old oil pit. The reports added that a search warrant was denied for lack of probable cause and better documentation. Photos were mentioned but not attached. I copied every page I could get. The copier light stuttered across the glass, and the machine spit out warm paper. My hands shook more the longer I stood there. My Uncle Frank's name came up over and over. He'd been questioned multiple times. He had alibis. The alibis were provided by family, including my father. The wording in the reports made me stop and read lines twice. It said Frank was on a fishing trip the weekend one of the men vanished. It said he was at a family cookout during another. It said he was homesick when the girl from the sandwich shop didn't come back from lunch. Every time there was a note about timelines, a note about phone calls from our house line, a note about records that were incomplete or missing. I kept my head down at home. Homework at the kitchen table, dishes, chores. My dad worked long hours at a different shop across town now. He came home smelling like coolant and smoke. The old garage by our house had been closed as long as I could remember. Just a low cinder block place half hidden by a fence and sumac. Nobody talked about it. When I asked my mom once why we never cleaned it out, she said it was full of junk and unsafe. I didn't press. I folded the copies and hid them under a stack of binders in my room. The next weekend I went back to the library and kept reading. I found small items in the back pages. Families holding candlelight vigils. A brother saying his sister was not the kind of person to run away. A detective quoted as saying they were following up on tips, but asked the public for patience. An opinion column mentioned the fear around the industrial district, how people stopped walking there after dark. It also mentioned how small-town gossip could ruin a man's life without proof, and named my uncle without naming him. It felt like not mine. I realized I had to investigate the old garage that had been abandoned behind our house for as long as I could remember. The garage behind our house had a warped metal door and a padlock that looked older than me. The windows were filmed over with dirt and spider webs. Inside, I could see vague shapes, hoods, shelves, a tire rack. I found a crowbar in our shed and went back when the street was quiet. The padlock had a brown scab of rust around the shackle. I wedged the tip of the crowbar under it and leaned my weight. The metal gave with a dry pop and fell into my hand, flakes of rust sticking to my palm. I slid the door up. It stuttered along the track and sent dust raining down. The air inside was stale and heavy, like old oil and mice. The concrete was gray, cracked in spider lines, with puddles of leaked fluid that had dried to dark stains. Shelves held carburetors, hoses, coffee cans of bolts. A drill press sat in the corner under a tarp. I moved slow so I wouldn't knock anything over. My shoes left prints in the dust. A rat ran along the far wall and disappeared behind a stack of tires. I told myself I was being paranoid and I'd find nothing. The floor said otherwise. Near the back bay there was a rectangle on the floor that didn't match. The concrete there was smoother, paler, and didn't show the same wear. The edges met the old slab in a straight line. When I tapped it with the crowbar, it sounded higher, like it was thinner. I scanned the wall and found a sledgehammer propped behind a rolling seat. The handle was sticky with grime. I tested the weight, set my feet, and swung at the patch. The first hit jarred my arms up to my teeth. The second hit cracked the surface in a neat white line. Dust rose in a chalky cloud. I worked in a grid, chipping out a square. Beneath the thin top layer, the sound changed. Hollow. I set the sledge down and used the claw of the crowbar to pry. The edge lifted, and a lid of poured cement came up like a stiff door. There were hinges on one side, embedded in the older slab. I coughed from the dust and the air that seeped out from the gap. It smelled like rot and chemicals. My stomach turned. Under the lid was a trap door of sheet metal with a recessed ring. I pulled it up. A black hole opened with a wooden ladder disappearing into it. The smell hit harder, like wet rust, bleach, and old meat. I stepped back and wiped my mouth. My hands shook. There was a flashlight on a shelf with paint cans. I shook it until the bulb flickered. It held a dim cone. I slid my foot onto the top rung and went down. The ladder creaked but held. The light showed gray walls lined with cinder block and a concrete floor. I reached the bottom and swung the light in a slow arc. There were iron rings bolted to the walls, 4 on the left, 4 on the right. The bolts were sunk deep. Short lengths of chain hung from 2 of them, the ends bright where they'd been cut or unclipped. The floor had reddish-brown smears, thin and dark. Some areas had circular scrub marks, like someone tried to clean and didn't finish. A drain sat near the middle, a rusted grate with hair and lint stuck in the slots. On a table made of 2 sawhorses and a door, there was a stack of Polaroids. A box cutter lay beside them. I picked up the top photo. It showed a man I recognized from an old newspaper picture, eyes swollen, a piece of tape over his mouth, sitting against a cinder block wall. The next photo was the girl from the sandwich shop. The next was the parts runner. They looked alive in some, unconscious in others. The background was this room. The dates were written with a black marker on the white borders. The worst were the last 2 stacks. The broken-down driver, the girl from the cul-de-sac. The photos were clear. The lighting matched the flashlight glare I saw now. My mouth tasted like metal. I kept flipping. My fingers stuck to the glossy paper. The last one stopped me. The date written on it was yesterday. The picture showed Noah tied to a chair, wrists taped to the arms, a bruise under his eye. He was looking straight at the camera, pupils blown, lips parted. The door in the background was the trap door I had just opened. I dropped the stack. Polaroids slid across the floor and fanned out. My breath came hard. I turned and went up the ladder fast, almost slipping on the second rung. I shoved the trapdoor down and dragged the cement lid back into place, then kicked the piece of floor over it as best as I could. I ran out of the garage and pulled the big door down until it slammed. At home, the house was quiet. I stood in the entryway and listened. The fridge hummed. A note sat on the kitchen table under a salt shaker. It was on a tear-off pad with our shop's old logo. The handwriting was my father's. Some family traditions are more important than friendship. Dad will pick you up after school tomorrow. We need to talk. I read it twice. My chest felt tight, but my head was clear. I took the note and the Polaroids I had stuffed under my hoodie. I packed my backpack with the copies from the library and my notebook. I left through the back door. I didn't go back home that night. I went straight to the police station with everything I had. The lobby was lit with hard fluorescent lights. A woman behind glass asked what I needed. I said I had evidence about the old disappearances and that someone was in danger right now. I set the Polaroids on the counter and slid the most recent one to the slot. She picked up a phone without looking away from me. 2 officers took me to a small room. I laid out the photos and the copies of the reports. I said the address of the garage. I said my father and my uncle had keys and access. I told them about the trap door and the rings. One officer kept his arms folded and watched me carefully. The other took notes and picked up the dated photo of Noah. He stared at the date. I told them about the smell, the drain, the chains. I told them about the note on my table and repeated the words exactly. They left the room together. After a few minutes, more people came in. A detective asked me to walk through the timeline. He asked when I opened the garage. He asked how I found the patch in the floor. He asked how I entered, what I touched. I answered. He took the note and sealed it in an evidence bag. Another officer photographed the Polaroids and called someone. The room felt colder. A sergeant came in and told me to wait there and not leave. They organized fast. I heard people moving down the hall. Radios crackled. The detective came back and said they were going to the property, that paramedics were en route. He asked if there was any other entrance. I said no. He left. I sat on the plastic chair and counted the drop-ceiling tiles and kept my hands flat on the table. The clock on the wall moved slow. It didn't take long before word came over a radio that they were on scene. Then more voices. Then the detective came back and said they'd found a hidden space under the floor, and that there was a person alive downstairs but in bad shape. He didn't say Noah's name. He didn't have to. He left again. Minutes later, an officer came in and said they had recovered remains from an area near the drain, and that the medical examiner had been called. He asked if I needed water. I said yes. He brought a paper cup and sat it in front of me and left. When they brought me to the station lobby, I saw the paramedics moving fast through the glass doors with a stretcher. A blanket covered a figure up to the chest, tubes and tape, oxygen mask. A hand hung off the side, and a knuckle had the same scar Noah got from slipping on our porch step in 8th grade. The gurney rolled into the night. I stood still and watched the doors slide shut. Officers picked up my father and my uncle within hours. There were blue lights on our street. I wasn't there. I was still at the station. A detective told me they were being questioned. He said they had enough for a warrant, and then more than enough after they found the basement. The detective asked if anyone else in my family had ever mentioned a downstairs room. I said no. He asked me to sign a statement with what I'd found, and when I found it. I did. Sometime around dawn, I was told they had both talked. My father and my uncle said the family business started with my grandfather in the 1970s. The auto shop was the front and the cover. They kept the downstairs space hidden for decades. When the old shop closed, they used it less, then more again. They said it had rules. They said they kept it in the family. They sounded like they were explaining a schedule. I listened without speaking until they stopped. An officer wrote and wrote. The investigation pulled everything up. They found the remains of the 4 people from the old case behind our property, in a trench that had been poured over and then dug again. In the basement, they tagged tools, tape, the box cutter, the iron rings. They pulled hair from the drain and sent it to the lab. The walls had scratches and lines that lined up with the rings. The Polaroids were bagged and logged. The dates on the backs matched the windows of the disappearances. Mine were now evidence, and not mine anymore. Noah was alive, but in critical condition. They said he had fractures and dehydration and a concussion. I wasn't allowed to see him. His parents were notified and went to the hospital. An officer sat with me until afternoon. I gave them every copy I had from the library. I showed them the notebook with the names and dates. They asked for my phone, and I gave it. They returned it later and told me not to answer unknown numbers. It didn't end with 4 victims. As they searched old records and the property, the number grew. They found items that matched missing person reports going back decades. Wallets, keys, a necklace. At least 12 victims over 3 generations. The report said, at least, and the detective said that meant they were still counting. The town paper printed an update with no names. The TV vans parked across the street from the station, but I kept my head down and didn't look. They moved me the next night. A car with no markings, 2 officers, a long drive on county roads. They said a program would keep me safe while the case went through. They said things about court dates and testimony and the right to be notified. I nodded. I had a bag with 2 shirts and a toothbrush and nothing else. The safe apartment they brought me to had clean walls and an empty fridge and a view of a parking lot. I didn't go back to my house. I didn't touch the garage again. The detective called once to say charges had been filed and to thank me for coming in fast. He said Noah was still in the hospital but stable. He said I did the right thing. I said okay. Then I put the phone down and sat by the window and watched people carry groceries from their cars. I live under a different name now and check the locks twice at night. The program handles mail and routes calls to a number I don't recognize. I go to work and back. I keep my head on a swivel when a car slows down near me. The case is a folder in a new county where nobody knows me from school. The words "family business" stay in my ear like a bad echo. They built it under a floor I walked past 100 times. The nights are the worst because they are quiet, and I hear little things the same way I did in the library, in the garage, on the ladder. Pipes. Wind. A truck downshifting far away. I think about the iron rings in the drain and the stack of photos. I think about the dates written in marker and how fresh ink looks when it dries. I still wake up every night wondering how many times I walked past that garage as a child, never knowing what was underneath my feet. I met Brandon at a coffee shop downtown when I was 33. He was 25 and had a neat haircut, clean sneakers, and a shy grin. I was reading a paperback at the window. He asked if I liked it. We talked about books for almost an hour, our cups leaving wet rings on the small round table. He liked crime novels and said he read on the train to work. I told him I liked memoirs and anything about how people sell ideas. The place smelled like roasted beans and bleach from a fresh mop. When we were done, we exchanged numbers and said we should meet again. We agreed to meet for lunch the next weekend at a busy cafe near the courthouse. I picked it because it is always crowded and parking is easy on Saturdays. The chalkboard out front listed soups and a pie of the day. Inside, silverware clinked, plates hit bus tubs, and the espresso machine hissed in waves. Brandon waved me over to a two-top against the brick wall. He stood to hug me, then sat and pushed a water glass toward me like a small gift. The date started normal. We traded the basics. I told him about my marketing job, the client who sold lawn tools, and the new ad buy that needed to go live Monday. He told me about tech support at a small software firm, and how he liked the feeling when a frantic caller calmed down. He asked about my commute, my favorite apps, if I ever wanted to freelance. It was easy and steady. We shared a plate of fries. He said he didn't usually eat lunch, but he would today. About 30 minutes in, the shift happened. He leaned forward and asked if I preferred older men or younger men and why. I shrugged that it depends on the person. Then he asked how many partners I'd had. I smiled and said, "First dates are not for numbers," then asked if he hiked any of the local trails. He nodded, then asked if I liked rough or gentle. He watched my face like he was waiting for a password. I set my fork down and told him my hobbies were hiking and cooking, not questionnaires. I described a trail with switchbacks and a creek with flat rocks. He listened, then asked if I ever filmed myself, or if I would for someone I loved. I told him we were strangers, and to please keep it respectful. I asked about his family. He said he had one sister and a mom who lived outside the city. He took a breath, then asked if I liked being told what to do. I changed the subject again. Movies, music, weekend chores, travel. Each time he let the new topic float for a minute, then he pulled it back to sex like he had a magnet in his hand. He asked if I had a safe word. He asked about places in my apartment. He kept his phone face down by his menu. He tapped the edge of the table with one finger when I talked. He smiled, but the muscles around his eyes did not move. The waiter came by to refill water. I asked for extra napkins just to break the rhythm. Brandon thanked him, then asked if I was on birth control. I said that was private and that he needed to stop. He said he was only being honest and wanted me to be honest too. I watched the door swing while people came and went. The room stayed normal. Our table did not. My shoulders were already angled toward the exit. I checked the time on my phone and told him I needed to go. I had errands and a client call. I moved my chair back and reached for my bag. He asked if he had made me uncomfortable. I told him yes, and that I had tried to change the subject many times. I stood. When I said I needed to leave, Brandon reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. His grip was firm. His fingers wrapped the bone and the edge of the table pressed into my stomach. I tried to pull back, but he held on and leaned, making a small scraping sound with his chair. I kept my voice low and clear. I told him to let go. He shook his head once. He said he could be good if I gave him another chance. He said I was the woman of his dreams. His eyes filled with tears until the edges went pink. He said he couldn't let me go because we were meant to be together. The water glass trembled near his elbow. A couple at the next table looked over, then went back to their food. I told him again to let go. I twisted my wrist the way they teach in those short safety videos, turning my thumb toward the gap in his grip. It worked on the second try. My chair legs scraped hard on the floor as I stepped back. I took my bag and moved sideways out of his reach. He reached after me with an open hand and said, "Please." I did not answer. I went past the dessert case, past a server balancing 4 coffee cups, and pushed through the glass door. Outside, the heat hit my face, and the street noise wrapped around me. I walked fast along the sidewalk toward the municipal lot behind the block. My keys were already hooked between my fingers. A bus rolled by and blew warm air across my knees. I kept my head up and my pace steady. I passed a mural of sunflowers, then turned into the lot between 2 brick buildings. Before I left the lot, my phone rang. Brandon's name showed with the cafe number. He was calling from the restaurant. I declined the call and drove home. The first message came before I got home, a long paragraph about how he felt a rare connection. By the time I parked, there were 11 more. My phone buzzed steady while I unlocked the building and climbed the stairs. Lines of text stacked on the notification screen, each one pushing the last one up. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter, turned on the light, and filled a glass of water. It kept vibrating, a small marching rhythm against the laminate. In the first hour, he sent over 50 messages. They were love declarations, then apologies, then questions he called innocent. He said we were perfect together. He asked why I had overreacted. He said he had never felt this way. He asked what kind of ring I liked. I blocked his number. The buzz stopped. I put the phone in a drawer and tried to start laundry. When I checked 10 minutes later, there were 2 missed calls from a number I did not know. Then another call from a different number. Then a text. "It's me. Please don't block this new one." By late afternoon, the count climbed. He started sending messages about our future. He wrote that he wanted 2 kids and gave them names. He described a house with a white fence, a dog, and a grill for weekends. He said we would host every holiday, and my parents would love him. He said he already knew which month we should get married and where. He sent a link to a venue he liked. He told me what my dress should look like. He attached a photo of a ring he saved. Then he sent one line: "Answer, or I can't live." A minute later: "I will do something bad if you keep ignoring me." The phone rang again. Different numbers. No caller ID. I ignored them. Voicemails stacked up. In one, he was sobbing, air catching in his throat. "Please, I'm trying to be good," he said. In another, his voice was flat and slow. He said, "You don't understand what you're doing to me." He followed with more texts from yet another number. He wrote detailed plans about setting up a nursery. He listed furniture and paint colors. He included a photo of a crib from an online store. He said we could start looking at houses this week. By evening, the count went past 100 messages. He sent photos of parks where he wanted to take our kids. He sent a menu from a restaurant he chose for our engagement dinner. He sent a draft for vows. The next 3 messages were about hurting himself and how it would be my fault. Then he circled back to love notes and pet names as if he had not typed the threats. He switched to caps, then back to normal, then a string of heart emojis, then a photo of his wrist with a red mark and the line, "See what you did." Another voicemail came right after that. He was crying hard. He begged me to call him back. He promised he would change everything I wanted. I took screenshots of the threads and saved the voicemails. I turned on Do Not Disturb and added my parents and 2 friends as allowed contacts. He still found new numbers to reach me. Calls arrived every 3 or 4 minutes, then 2 at the same time. The phone heated up in my palm. I set it on a ceramic plate to keep it cool. I ate toast over the sink because I didn't want to be more than a few feet from the charger, watching the count. At midnight, he crossed 300 texts and 150 calls. The last message before I tried to sleep was a photo of a tuxedo with the words, "I'll be handsome for you." Then a final line in all caps telling me to answer, or he would end it tonight. I moved the dresser in front of my door and placed my shoes under the window. I lay down with the phone on my chest and the charger line draped like a seatbelt. The screen lit the ceiling in beats. I didn't sleep. The harassment continued non-stop through the night. At 8 a.m., I took a shower, dressed in jeans and a plain sweater, and drove to the police station. I parked in the visitor lot and walked in holding my phone, charger cord still wrapped around it. The lobby had hard chairs and a rack with brochures about neighborhood watches and victim services. I told the desk officer I needed to report harassment. He handed me a clipboard with a form, then called an officer from the back. Officer Webb met me in a small room with a metal table. He asked me to show him the messages. I scrolled through the threads. He watched silently, eyes moving over dates and times. He counted the missed calls on my log, then asked to play one voicemail. He listened to 30 seconds and told me to pause. He took notes with a blunt pencil and wrote the numbers down. He asked if I knew him well. I said I had met him twice and explained the scene at the cafe. He nodded once and left to speak with a supervisor. He returned with a domestic violence advocate and a packet. He said we could file for a temporary restraining order that day. He said a judge could review it quickly. He told me to keep everything: texts, call logs, voicemails, screenshots. He even asked me to back them up to a cloud or email. We filled out a sworn statement. I described the timeline: the cafe, the grab, the messages, the threats, the counts. The advocate circled phrases and added codes for the form. They took a copy of my screenshots. While the paperwork moved through the system, I sat in the lobby and searched Brandon's name on my phone. I found a LinkedIn with his job listed. I found an old news brief for a workplace award. Then I found court records in a nearby county naming him in 3 separate civil cases. All 3 were restraining orders. Filing dates were spread over 2 years. The petitioners were women with different last names. I typed each name and found 2 Facebook profiles and 1 Instagram. I did not comment. I didn't have to. One woman messaged me that afternoon. She said she saw my name and guessed why I was searching. She asked, "Did he start after 1 date?" She shared screenshots. The messages had the same pattern: a flood of love, then plans for marriage, then threats, then tears. She said it got worse when she tried to block him. She said he followed her once after work. She told me to be careful. A second woman replied later with court documents. She had a final order and a photo of it saved on her phone. She wrote, "He becomes violent when rejected. Do not meet him. Keep everything public." Reading that, I understood the pattern was not new. I realized I had become his latest target. By evening, the temporary restraining order was signed. An officer explained the next steps. They would serve him. I should call 911 if he showed up or contacted me again. He gave me a card with a case number. I took the packet home, then called my parents. I told them I would come stay for a while. The next day I met a lawyer in a small office above a pharmacy. The carpet was thin and the wall clock ticked loud. He specialized in protective orders. He photocopied my packet and the screenshots. He explained the process for a permanent order. He said we needed to show continued harassment and the credible threats. He told me to keep logging any new numbers. He suggested I turn my social media to private and tighten privacy on location settings. I did all of that while sitting in his office. I packed a suitcase and a box with files, chargers, and my work laptop. My parents lived 20 minutes away in a one-story house with a chain-link fence. I moved into my old room. My dad switched the porch lights to motion sensors. My mom set an extra key on a hook by the back door. For the next hearing, my lawyer prepared a binder with call logs, printed messages, and a list of numbers. We included the warnings from his exes as exhibits. In court, the judge read my affidavit and listened to brief statements. Brandon did not speak much. He stared at the table. The judge granted the permanent restraining order. It ordered him to attend anger management classes and therapy. It required him to stay at least 500 feet from my home and my workplace. The bailiff handed copies to both sides. I folded mine and put it flat in my bag, then saved a photo of it on my phone. The call stopped after he was served. I changed my routes anyway. I varied my commute. I parked under lights. I let coworkers know, with only what they needed to know. At the grocery store, I chose different aisles than usual. I checked mirrors before unlocking my car. I carry my phone in my front pocket now, not in my bag. I keep the case number in my notes app and the order in my photos. I look farther down the sidewalk when I leave any building. The experience changed how I start dates. I search names. I check public records. I meet only in bright, busy places, and I set an end time. I scan for exits when I sit down. I let my friend know when I leave and when I get home. I pay attention to small shifts and to questions that push boundaries too fast. Sometimes what looks like intense interest is a warning. I trust that. I now research potential dates more thoroughly and always meet in very public places. We drove to Crater Lake in one car, 5 of us crammed around coolers and tents. It was last April, cold in the shade, with thin snow tucked under the trees. I sat behind Alex, a senior biology major, listening while he talked gear with our friends. I had liked him for months. I never told him. He was steady, the kind of person who checks straps twice and keeps matches in a dry bag. We found a site with a steel ring and a warped picnic table. Pines cut the wind. Through trunks, the lake showed blue inside rock. When Alex suggested we take the kayak out before dinner, I said yes, so fast I sounded overeager. He made it sound simple, like a quick loop to watch the sunset. Our friends unpacked the stove and the food bin. A bag of tortillas hit the table with a thud. Someone snapped twigs and the crack carried across the campground. We lifted the tandem to the shore. The water was calm and dark blue, like paint in a tray. An empty trailer sat near the launch, winch strap hanging. There was gasoline smell and a couple working on a knot. Alex checked the life vests and tugged my strap until the foam pressed my ribs, then tapped the buckle. "Good," he said, and showed me where to put my feet and how to keep my knees loose. He slid the bow until it kissed the water. "Let your arms do the work, not your shoulders." I sat in front. He eased in behind me, one hand on the dock, then pushed us off. The hull knocked softly against tiny ripples. On shore, the stove flared. Orange light jumped under a pot and died again while we glided out toward center. He taught me the stroke. Dip, pull, lift, switch. I splashed myself a few times until I caught the rhythm. He kept the pace slow so I could match him. The shore slid back. When I looked down, the water was clear enough to see a few rocks and a long, pale branch. A breeze pushed a sheet of tiny waves, and the kayak rose and fell like breathing. We moved along the face of the rim, maybe 100 yards from shore. Campground sounds thinned out. A voice, a lid clacking, one pop from the fire ring behind us. We let the boat glide. He rested his paddle across his lap, and I did the same, copying him. The bow cut a narrow V and closed it behind us. The sun slid down until the rim ate it, and the blue turned to dull steel. The light on Alex's shoulders changed gray. I felt cold bite deeper through my sleeves. He leaned forward so I could hear him without shouting, and told me how the crater filled and why the water stays clear. I looked back at shore smoke flattening under trees, and then faced the quiet water there. Alex's expression changed in an instant. His jaw tightened and his eyes went past me to the left. He stopped talking mid-sentence and didn't blink. The quiet of the lake felt loaded. I turned slowly to see what he was looking at because he never looked like that. The kayak rocked a little under us and steadied. I kept my paddle flat across my lap like he had shown me, and kept my shoulders low. I followed his gaze over the rim of the cockpit and toward the far side of the lake where the water darkened in evening light. A motorboat was moving toward us from the far side. It cut across the last light, bouncing a little over the chop. A man stood in the boat. He wore camouflage, the blotchy kind that looks like old leaves. He had a hunting rifle up. The barrel was pointed at our kayak. It didn't waver. He moved it back and forth between me and Alex like he was choosing where to place a nail. The motor droned low and steady. The bow lifted, fell, lifted again. He planted his feet and adjusted with the motion without looking down or away. Alex pointed over my shoulder, 2 fingers close to the deck. His voice stayed low. "Get down. No sudden moves," he whispered. I slid my hands to the cockpit rim and folded myself until my chest pressed my knees. The plastic chilled through my jacket. My paddle rolled and clicked against my boot. I stopped it and held still. Behind me, Alex eased lower and the stern sank an inch, then steadied. I kept my head below the coaming and watched a bolt head because it gave me something fixed to stare at instead of water and the rifle there. The man kept the muzzle on us. He did not speak. The barrel tracked left and right, slow and smooth. When the boat's wake reached us, it came as a slow, heavy fold. We rose and dropped. The hull whispered as tiny bubbles slid along it. I could smell the fuel now, sharp in my nose. The engine sound filled my chest. I listened for anything from shore and heard only the motor and small slaps under the hull. Alex's knee touched the back of my vest and stayed there. He whispered we would wait and do nothing for now. The boat closed in. Maybe 50 yards now. Close enough for me to see the man's face under the brim of his cap. He looked middle-aged. His eyes were too wide, white in the lake light. His beard was rough and unshaven, gray tangled with dark. His mouth was flat. He didn't call out. He didn't ask a thing. He watched the way people watch a target. The hull of his boat rocked to one side and back. The motor note stayed low even. The rifle didn't dip. His hands were steady on the rifle as he tracked our movements. The first shot hit the water 5 feet off our bow. It cracked the quiet and punched a geyser up that slapped me in the face. I tasted lake water and fuel. Echo bounced off the rim and came back thin. The man worked the boat closer, body squared, rifle still up. I felt Alex shift behind me. He reached over my shoulder, grabbed my paddle near the throat, and jammed it back into my hands. "Paddle. Hard," he said. I set the blade in and pulled like he had taught me. No pause, no glide. Just pull and switch. We turned toward the nearest line of rocks and trees. The kayak banged through little chop we would have ignored earlier. I heard the second shot before the spray hit my cheek and jacket. A bullet smacked the water by my left hand. The hull lurched. I kept the paddle moving. My hands found a rhythm even if it was messy. Alex matched me and pushed a stronger stroke from the back, driving the stern. The motorboat came faster. I could feel the sound in my spine, a low saw cutting closer. The barrel kept sliding between us. I kept my head down and eyes on shore. The third shot came in quick after the second. It hit so close to the cockpit that the spray hit our faces and dripped from my chin. The kayak rocked hard to the right. I dug my right blade down to brace, then pulled. The bow lifted over a small wake and slammed into the back of it. The paddle caught, stalled, and then tore loose. My arms burned. I did not look back. Alex cursed, one short word, and we both pushed harder. A deep scrape under the hull told me we were in shallower water. The shore grew sharper. Rocks, a fallen log, a man in a red jacket waving his arms. The gunman shouted something. His voice carried over the motor and the slap of water. I could not make the words clean. It sounded like he was telling us to stop. I kept going. Alex did not answer him. He grunted and pushed, keeping us straight. The bow swung slightly left, and he corrected from the stern. The kayak jumped forward in uneven bursts. Another wave rolled under us from the motorboat's wake, and we teetered, then straightened. The shoreline was not far now. I could see pebbles under the surface and the dark edge where the lake kissed rock. We hit the shallows so fast the bow stuck in gravel and threw me forward into the coaming. Pain pulsed across my ribs. I yanked at the skirt loop and popped out. Cold water filled my boots. Alex was already out on the other side, dragging the stern up by the toggle. We heaved the kayak onto rock. Our friends were running down the path. Other campers behind them stared. Someone yelled, "Gunshots!" Someone else shouted to call the Rangers. I turned and saw the motorboat veer away, tracing an arc toward the opposite shore. The man lowered the rifle, then lifted it again as if to aim at the people on land, then turned fully and went for speed. Alex pulled his phone from a dry pocket and dialed with wet fingers. He gave our location in clipped words, the campground number, the lake, the shots. He repeated details as he listened. I stood bent over with my hands on my thighs and spit water, my socks squished in soaked boots. A woman handed me a towel and then took it back when I didn't grab it right. A man in a tan jacket jogged to the edge and watched the motorboat. "He's heading to the far dock," he said. "Opposite side." Someone else said they saw the boat earlier, empty trailer by the launch. We pulled the kayak farther up out of reach. Our friends flanked us, one picking up my dropped paddle. From across the water, the motorboat was a dark smudge moving along the shadowed shore. The engine note faded and then vanished under wind in the trees. Sirens weren't a thing out here, just radio calls and boats. In about 20 minutes, a low aluminum patrol boat rounded the point, a blue light bar flashing without sound. 2 Rangers in green jackets stood inside it, one driving, one with binoculars. They gave us a look, took in the kayak, the cluster of campers, and angled toward the opposite shore without stopping. We waited on the rocks. The sun was gone. The cold came on fast. Someone built the fire bigger. Alex finally sat on the bench and pressed his hand to his eyes and then dropped it. The ranger boat cut back and forth on the far side, and then disappeared behind a dock I couldn't see from our angle. A radio crackled. They were talking to each other on handhelds on shore now. One ranger's truck rolled into the lot behind the trees, lights rotating. He came down with a flashlight and a small notebook. He asked if anyone was hit. He asked if we fired any shots. He asked about the motorboat's color, the man's hat, the rifle. We gave simple answers. The radio said they found a motorboat tied up at a small dock on the far side. It was empty. The ranger with us asked about timing. First shot? Last shot? How many? How close? My throat felt raw from lake water, but I spoke clear. Alex filled in gaps I missed. He gave the make of our kayak and the route we took out and back. The ranger wrote. He told us they would sweep the woods and check trailheads, cabins, and cars. He said to stay close to camp. He assigned another ranger to sit by the launch for the night. They took our statements again on forms, this time with printed headers, case number at the top. A ranger walked us through a brief process, where we'd be if they needed us, a card with a phone number, what to do if we saw the man again. He kept his voice even. He said similar reports had come in this month from lakes within a few hours' drive, but nothing quite like this. A couple of campers decided to pack up early. We stayed because there was nowhere to go, and the rangers were here. The night felt close around the circle of light. We heard later, through a call from the ranger's office to Alex, that the man's name was Dwayne Miller, local, unemployed, with a record for disorderly conduct and a history of mental health problems. They said he had been drifting around forests and lakes, living rough, hot wiring or borrowing boats from docks, and picking targets without pattern. He was arrested a month later in a neighboring county after pointing a rifle at another group of kayakers and screaming at them from a pontoon boat. Deputies boxed him in at a marina. No one was hurt. He went quietly when they ordered him down. When a ranger followed up with us, he said Miller had scattered campsites along logging roads, piles of canned food and old hunting magazines, a dry box full of loose ammo, and a map with lakes circled. They didn't have a clear motive beyond anger and paranoia. The district attorney filed charges, brandishing a firearm, assault with a deadly weapon, unlawful discharge, a stack of related counts. He would likely be held for evaluation. We were told we could be called to testify about what happened on the water. We agreed to show up if needed. We went back to our normal days, but with new steps. I added a whistle and a small radio to my pack, read park alerts, checked recent reports, and looked at maps for exits before going out. Alex bought brighter PFDs and a waterproof case just for the phone. We moved slower around water, watched wakes and other boats harder. The story burned down to a set of facts we could carry without spinning out. Shots, distance, boat, shore, time. There was no dramatic rap. It was a near thing we escaped by luck and quick paddling. What should have been a clean, quiet evening on a lake was a moment where a stranger aimed a rifle at us and pulled the trigger 3 times. We were lucky. His aim was poor, or his intent was to scare, and he changed his mind. We reached land before a round found plastic, flesh, or life vest foam. It changed how I think about easy trips and pretty places. I still go outside. I still camp. But I stay close to people now, ask the ranger at the desk about recent problems, and pay attention when the lot is empty or a trailer is parked without a boat. Crater Lake is still blue on clear days, and the rim still holds the wind. It is also a place where a man in camouflage once leaned into a wake with a rifle and decided we were his target for a few minutes. That is part of my map now. I tell people to check reports, to have a plan, to remember that the water is wide and sound is strange out there. Sometimes, in the most peaceful places, a dangerous person is standing up in a motorboat, steady hands on a gun, tracking your movements. I got home from Roosevelt Middle School a little after 3 p.m., same as always. The bus dropped me at the corner and I cut across the patchy grass by Mrs. Clark's fence. I let myself in, the door sticking a little like it always did, and I pushed it closed with my hip. I dropped my backpack in the hallway, right under the coat hooks, kicked off my shoes, and headed to the kitchen. I made a ham sandwich, poured a glass of milk, and sat at the table. Our kitchen window faced Maple Street. The screen was a little bent in the corner, and the view was the 3 elm trees, the cracked sidewalk, and our mailbox that leaned a bit left. While I ate, I noticed a man walking slowly along the sidewalk. He had a dark jacket and a cap. He'd take a few steps, stop, look around like he was trying to read a house number from far away, then keep going down Maple. I watched him until he moved out of the window frame, and then I went back to the sandwich, chewing slower, listening to the fridge hum and the wall clock tick. 10 minutes later, the same guy came back from the opposite direction. He didn't keep a steady pace. He drifted, stopping in front of our yard, right by the hedge where my dad's sprinkler always got stuck. He stood there longer this time, head tilted up at the windows, then at the front door. Something about it felt wrong, but not in a big way, just off. He wasn't on his phone. He didn't knock anywhere. He was looking without any plan. I swallowed the last bite and wiped my hands on a napkin. I told myself he was lost or looking for an address he couldn't find. The sun was hitting the metal numbers on houses, and maybe the glare confused him. People got turned around on Maple all the time because the street curved near the stop sign. I carried my plate to the sink and ran some water over it. The faucet squealed a little, and I turned it off fast. I stood there a second longer than normal, like I didn't want to make any noise. Then I went to the hallway, picked up my backpack, and unzipped it at the kitchen table. I laid out my math book, a pencil with bite marks, and the worksheet with the smudged header. I kept thinking about a science quiz the next day and the diagram of a cell I couldn't remember. I looked back at the window. The man wasn't there anymore. The street was empty except for a grocery bag blowing against a curb. I listened to the house breathing, the little creaks, the hot water pipes ticking as the heater cycled off. The front door was shut. The chain was folded up on its hook like always. I didn't touch it. My mom's list on the fridge said, snack, homework, lock door. I noticed it, looked away, and sharpened my pencil over the trash with the little hand crank sharpener. I wrote my name at the top of the worksheet, then stopped. The house felt bigger when I was alone. I could hear the clock from the living room and the faint hum of traffic from farther down Maple near the post office. A car door slammed somewhere and I flinched, then felt dumb. I stacked the books, deciding I'd start after one TV show to clear my head. The man was gone. The street was quiet. People got lost every day. I told myself that twice and packed up the pencil. Around 4 p.m., I moved to the living room. The carpet was thin by the couch where our dog used to scratch before he died last year. I sat on the left cushion, because the right one sagged, and grabbed the remote from the coffee table. The TV took a second to wake up. I flipped to a rerun I'd seen a dozen times. I stretched my legs, set my math book on the edge of the table, and decided I'd start the assignment when the credits rolled. The house looked normal in the afternoon light. About halfway through the episode, I heard the front door open. It wasn't a knock. It was the metal latch, a soft rub of wood on wood, and then the door easing in. I felt it in my chest before my brain caught up. My parents never came home early. If they did, they called. No call. I stared at the hallway and realized what I'd done. I hadn't locked the door when I came home. My parents reminded me every day. Lock the door first, my mom said. I had thought about that quiz instead. Footsteps moved on the entry rug, Slow, careful steps. Not my dad's heavy shoes. Not my mom's quick steps. The sound was softer, like someone testing each piece of floor before putting their weight on it. I muted the TV without thinking, thumb shaking on the remote. The voices disappeared and the house got very quiet. The hallway air felt colder than the living room. I didn't get up. I didn't say anything. I kept my eyes on the shadow line where the hall opened into the living room. The steps didn't come toward me. They stayed in the hallway, then drifted into the kitchen on my left. I knew the feel of those floors. I could map them in my head by sound. The person was close to the sink. A cabinet door opened with a little click. A drawer slid out and stopped with the wooden thud the runners always made. Another drawer. Metal moved, spoons sliding, the tin measuring cups rattling once, then going quiet. I heard the cabinet under the sink open, the plastic bin creak, the bottle of dish soap knock and roll. I stared at the math book on the table like that could anchor me. I could see the corner of the kitchen doorway from the couch, just a sliver, and the edge of our fridge with the list my mom wrote. The light in there was softer, yellow, the kind we only used in the afternoon. Another drawer slid. The junk drawer. I knew that scrape. Batteries, rubber bands, a little flashlight that barely worked, menus folded tight. The person moved slower now, not like they were nervous, but like they were sure nothing would stop them. I tried to count breaths and lost track. The only other sound was the wall clock and the tiny buzz of the TV screen with the picture frozen in silence. A cabinet by the stove opened. Pots shifted. A lid clinked against a pan and then was set down carefully. I heard a pause, like the person was thinking, then the light touch of fingers on the edges of drawers, not slamming, not fumbling, just steady and exact. One more drawer slid, the pencil drawer near the phone. The pages of the notepad flipped once. The pattern didn't change. Open, look, close. No hurry, no talking, no cough or sniff or any sound that said who it was. The footsteps were light enough that I couldn't tell the weight. Another cabinet. The cereal boxes rustled. Something was moved aside on the shelf where we kept the first aid kit. I could picture the small white box with the red cross in the corner, the tape flap coming loose months ago. A plastic click, then silence again. Then the soft thud of that cabinet closing, neat and controlled. The fridge door stayed shut. The person never went for the obvious noise. They stuck to drawers and cabinets like a checklist. I heard the thin jingle of the key bowl by the microwave, the small metal ring tapping porcelain. Then stillness, and then the tiniest scrape of fingernails or a coin against wood, as if the person slid something small to the edge and left it there. The steps shifted. Another drawer. The one near the back door with the flashlight batteries we never used. I sat without moving. My mouth felt dry. The TV image flickered and tried to make a sound, but it was on mute. The house had the careful quiet of a library, except for those little clicks and slides. I listened to the exact way the drawers traveled and stopped, like the person knew the stop point and didn't force it. The hinges never squealed. The person avoided the ones that squealed. Nothing fell. Nothing crashed. The sounds were deliberate and methodical, like someone searching for specific items. I slid off the couch and crouched low, moving behind the big recliner in the corner by the window. It was tight between the wall and the chair. The fabric smelled like dust, and the old leather arm had a split seam that scratched my wrist as I squeezed in. I kept the TV muted. The house was quiet except for the steps in the kitchen. A drawer closed, then another. Paper rustled. Metal tapped porcelain again, the key bowl. The steps shifted back into the hallway, then crossed toward my dad's study. I heard the study door push open and bump the doorstop with the small rubber head. The desk drawer slid, then the file cabinet latch clicked, and the heavy drawer rolled out. I stayed still. My knees pressed into the carpet, and the fibers imprinted on my skin. The person moved calmly. The desk chair wheels rolled a few inches, then stopped. Something thin scraped the desk surface, then a soft thud like a book being set down. I heard the cabinet doors over the printer open. A box lid cracked. The printer tray snapped shut. The study door clicked again, and the steps went back to the hallway. The dining room next. The china cabinet doors squeaked a little. The intruder slowed and eased them so the squeak didn't get loud. A fork tapped a plate. A drawer with cloth napkins slid and stopped. Chairs nudged the rug. Nothing fell. Everything was methodical. He was working the first floor in a line. Living room was closest to me. I kept my breathing even and shallow, and watched the shadow line on the carpet under the gap at the bottom of the recliner. It didn't change. The steps past the living room entry, paused, then moved on. A floorboard near the vent made a small pop when he stepped off it, the same way it always did under weight. Back to the kitchen. Another cabinet. The pantry door latch clicked and released. Boxes shifted. Plastic bags crinkled once and then were still. The faucet turned on for a second, then off, like he rinsed fingers or tested the handle. He went to the stairs. The first step has a slight groan. I heard it. Then the next step, quieter. Then up, steady, not rushing. The sound of wood changed as he reached the landing. A door upstairs opened. My room was left of the stairs. My parents' room was right. I heard my closet door rollers move on their track. Something light slid over the carpet. Then the bathroom cabinet doors thumped softly as they closed. When the upstairs floor sounds settled into that slow, careful rhythm, I moved. I slid out from behind the recliner and stayed low, palms on the carpet. I crawled to the end of the couch and paused, listening. The footsteps crossed from one bedroom to the other. A drawer opened, then another. I slipped along the coffee table, past the cold TV screen, and into the hall toward the kitchen. My socks grabbed at the carpet, and I picked my feet up higher to keep them quiet. The kitchen tile was cooler on my hands. I reached the back door. The back door has a deadbolt and a knob lock. The deadbolt was still turned to open. I wrapped my fingers around the knob and tested it. The hinge makes a small chirp if you push it too fast. I pushed slow. The door tapped the weather strip. I paused, listening for any change upstairs. The faint sound of hangers sliding in my closet kept going. I pushed the door another inch, then another, until the gap was enough for my shoulder. I squeezed into the gap and stepped onto the small back mat. The air outside was colder. I pulled the door closed until the latch caught without a click. I stayed low, moved along the side of the house, and kept my feet off the gravel because it pops. I took the flagstone path to the gate. The latch on our gate sticks if you push from the wrong angle. I lifted it from underneath, eased it up until it cleared, and slid the gate just far enough to fit through. I closed it the same way, keeping my hand under the latch to guide it down slow. Then I ran. The Miller's house was next door on the right. Their backyard has a short chain-link fence with a gap by the trash cans. I went through the gap, cut across their patchy grass, and around to the front porch. I rang the bell and knocked twice fast. The door opened almost at once. Mrs. Miller looked at my face, then at my hands. "Inside," she said, and she pulled me over the threshold by the shoulder. I said, "Someone's in our house." She picked up the phone on the little table by the stairs and dialed. "There's a break-in," she said into the receiver. "Next door. A child is with me. Send units now." She kept her hand on my arm and guided me to the front window. We stood behind the curtain and watched Maple Street. The minute hand on her clock moved once. A siren sounded far away. Another siren came from the other side. The sound grew louder and then cut off. A patrol car slid to the curb in front of our driveway. Another rolled to the corner. Blue and red lights flashed on the bare branches. Mrs. Miller said, "Stay down." I did. 2 officers moved along our walkway with hands close to their belts. One went to the front door. The other cut around the side toward the back. We waited. A third car arrived and stopped at the cross street. An officer parked at an angle and kept the engine running. The first officer at our front door tried the knob and then signaled to his partner. They fanned out, then regrouped. One spoke into his radio. Another minute passed. A fourth car came, no siren, just lights. The officers surrounded our house, but he slipped out the back before they went in. The side gate was open when they reached it. The back door was ajar with the latch still resting against the strike plate. One officer knelt and looked at the lock. Another scanned the yard and the alley. No movement. They cleared the first floor room by room, calling out short commands. Then the second floor. No one was inside. The house was quiet except for their radios and boots. They started pointing to things. In the study, the desk drawers were open a few inches, not yanked wide. The file cabinet had a few folders pulled forward, like someone checked labels. In the dining room, the china cabinet door sat barely open, and a velvet ring box was on the table where it didn't belong. In the living room, the TV's HDMI cable was coiled on the coffee table like someone started to take it, but didn't. In the kitchen, the junk drawer was sorted into neat piles on the counter. Batteries, coins, keys, old gift cards. He had searched systematically. He skipped food and went right for anything that looked like electronics or jewelry or small valuables. The first aid kit was open with the cash envelope we sometimes kept missing. A detective in plain clothes showed up and walked through with gloves on. He nodded at the patterns. He told us later this wasn't a random break-in. They had reports in our neighborhood earlier that week of a man walking slow, stopping, staring at doors and windows. Several addresses along Maple and the next street over had called it in. It matched what I had seen earlier out the kitchen window. He said the person was being careful and learning routines. While we stood in the Miller's front room, an officer stayed with us and kept his radio turned up. Calls came over the channel. Another unit reported a suspicious male 3 blocks south near the laundromat carrying a backpack and a small electronics bag. The description fit. Within an hour of the first cars arriving on our street, they had him stopped. Another call said he had items with serial numbers scratched on a notepad, jewelry pieces in a pouch, and a tablet case with a school sticker from a house on Oak. Those were from a different house hit earlier that afternoon. They drove him past, and even at a distance through the windshield, I recognized the shape of his cap and jacket. It was the same guy I watched from our kitchen window. The detective said later that he had been studying the neighborhood for days, checking which houses were empty between 3 and 5:30. He said the pattern was homes where teenage kids got home alone and forgot basic security. He repeated it like a warning. Lock doors, keep blinds closed, don't assume daylight is safe. My parents pulled up behind a cruiser while I was giving my statement at the Miller's dining table. The officer had a clipboard and the little boxes for time and address and description. I told him the sounds, the order of the rooms, the hinge chirp, the steps on the stairs, the way he moved the drawers just enough. My mom opened the Miller's door and froze when she saw the uniform in their hallway and me sitting there. My dad came right behind her. He looked from my face to the officer's notes to the window. He asked, "Are you hurt?" I said no. He put a hand on the table and then took it back when the officer asked him not to touch the forms. We went next door with the detective. He showed my parents where the guy had gone. The detective pointed to the study drawers and the living room cables and the kitchen counter with the piles. He said the back door should be kept locked and the gate latch fixed. He said the person left when police units arrived and probably saw the lights through the back fence gaps. He said the person had been caught 3 blocks away carrying stolen items from another house. It was the same person I saw earlier on the sidewalk. He had a long record in the system and was out of prison 2 months. The charges stacked fast. Burglary for today, breaking and entering, possession of stolen property. The detective said there would be more from the other houses that filed reports. They took my parents' statements too. An officer dusted a few surfaces and then stopped when he saw the drawer edges were clean. Whoever did it wore gloves. They logged the scene and then left us with a card and a case number. We cleaned up in short moves. My dad pushed the drawers closed. My mom checked the jewelry box and the nightstand. The small cash envelope from the first aid kit was gone, and a cheap watch from my dad's dresser was missing, but the big things were still there. My dad rechecked every lock and put a broom handle in the track of the sliding back door. He tested the gate and tied the latch with a zip tie until he could fix it right. That night, I triple-checked the deadbolt without being told. The next morning, I watched the street before leaving for school. I logged the time we left and the time we got home. I paid attention to people who walked slow and stared too long. I didn't make a scene. I just noted faces and clothes and the way they moved. I told the officer I'd call if I saw anyone matching the description again. Weeks later, we got an update from the detective. The man pled to multiple counts. He had a record that stretched back years in another county. He had been out of prison for 2 months and started working his way along streets like ours because it was quiet and the routines were predictable. The detective said he picked houses with kids because kids come home first and forget locks. He counts on that, he said. Don't give it to him. I kept that line in my head. I locked the door before I took off my backpack. I checked the chain, even if I was only going to the kitchen for a glass of water. If I saw someone pause too long at a mailbox or stand under a tree and study a porch, I made a note. We put a camera above the door and a light on a motion sensor. None of that changed the fact that a stranger had been in our house while I was alone. It wasn't about panic. It was about small actions. Close the gate, hear the hinge, turn the bolt, look once more out the window. The man they caught wanted things, not a fight. But that didn't make it safe. He had stood at our door in daylight and walked in because I forgot a step. I didn't forget it again. Olivia is 7, small and quiet, in a way that makes teachers lean down to hear her. When the moving truck pulled up across the street last spring, she stood on our porch steps with her hands behind her back, watching a tall teenage boy lift boxes like they were empty. He waved at her. He walked over with a skateboard tucked under one arm and asked if she wanted to see how to kick turn. He told me his name was Justin, that he was 15, and his mom worked late. He was careful with his words. He asked if he could show Olivia a few tricks on the sidewalk where I could see. I said yes and sat on the porch rail while he adjusted her helmet strap. He checked for pebbles, traced a loose crack with his shoe, and told her to keep her knees soft. For the first time in months, she laughed. He kept the board low and slow, one hand hovered near her shoulder. He asked me if it was okay to come by on weekends. He spoke like a kid trying to sound older, but he was polite. He called me ma'am. He brought a small sheet of cat stickers he said he didn't need, and a box of grape candies from the corner store. My husband, Mark, liked him right away. Mark works odd shifts and misses weekends, so he liked seeing someone give Olivia patient attention. We set rules. Front yards only. Door open if they played video games. Homework first. Justin nodded, repeated back the rules, and thanked us. He helped her with math worksheets at our kitchen table, pencil tapping a rhythm while he waited for her to answer. He handed me each sheet when they finished, corners neatly stacked. On sunny days, he chalked little targets on the sidewalk and taught her to push off, stop with her heel, and step clear before the board rolled. Those first months felt easy. Justin came by after school, stayed an hour, and always checked with me first. If I said no because of dinner or chores, he shrugged and said he'd try tomorrow. Sometimes he'd knock just to drop off a prize, a folded paper crane, a rubber ring from a vending machine. Olivia kept them in a tin by her bed. When fall came, he walked her to the bus stop on mornings with a clear umbrella big enough for two. He was careful about language, careful about time. We joked that we had lucked into a built-in big brother. About 6 months in, little things shifted. Justin started texting me instead of knocking, asking to pick Olivia up from school so they could practice at the park. It was daylight, so I said okay if he kept to the basketball court where the cameras were. He sent a thumbs up. The next week, when a girl from Olivia's class rang our bell to ask if she could draw with chalk, Justin stood behind Olivia and said they were busy with a new trick. His voice was steady, but I saw his jaw set. Later, Olivia told me the girl had to go home anyway. It felt small, but it stuck. The gifts changed too. One afternoon, he showed up with a slim box and told Olivia it was a surprise for learning to stop without stepping off the board. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a tiny heart. It looked real. I asked where he got it. He said a friend owed him, and he wanted Olivia to have something nice. Another time, he handed her a sealed bottle of perfume, heavy glass with a name I see in mall display cases. He said it was a sample. Then there was a pale blue dress with thin straps that would have fit a teenager, not a second grader. I told him the dress wasn't appropriate and that the perfume was for adults. I kept my tone plain. He nodded, took the dress back to his house, and left the perfume on our table. He said he was just trying to make her feel special. That night, I put the bottle in a high cabinet. A few days later, he sat with her on our front steps, phone tilted toward her. The sound was low, words I couldn't catch, diagrams sliding across the screen. When I stepped out, he angled the phone away and said it was an educational video. Olivia said they were learning about relationships. My mouth went dry. From then on, Olivia spent more time at his place. The houses on our street are close, single story with small fenced yards and low shrubs that don't hide much. I could see their living room through the front window when the blinds were open. Sometimes they did homework at his coffee table. Other times I saw them in the kitchen, his hands moving while he explained something. He still asked permission, but he pushed for longer. An hour became 2. 2 became 3. If I said she had piano, he'd ask what time she would be free the next day. Olivia started repeating little phrases he used. She started moving quieter. In small ways, I saw control. When Olivia tried to show me a drawing she made with the neighbor girl, Justin told her they could finish it later and steered her toward the driveway. He said they had a schedule. When Mark invited Justin to toss a ball in our yard, Justin said he and Olivia were in the middle of a lesson and touched the top of her head like a coach calling plays. He began tracking her time, telling me how many minutes they had practiced or read. He kept a notepad in his pocket, and I saw him writing dates and rewards like points. Olivia began spending more and more time at his house, often returning home with stories about things Justin had taught her. After that, small lies started to pile up. I found the gold necklace in a sock drawer when I was putting away clean clothes. Olivia said she bought it with saved allowance. She had $8 in a jar. The perfume bottle I tucked in the cabinet was back on her desk, half used, with a scarf tied around it. She said a girl at school gave it to her. I saw the pale blue dress stuffed behind her beanbag chair with the tag still on. When I asked where she wore it, she said, "Nowhere." Her answers came quick and flat, like she practiced them. I checked her backpack one night because it felt heavier than usual. Inside, there was a new cosmetic bag with glittery brushes. A folded note said, "For your future," with a little heart. The handwriting looked like Justin's. I asked Olivia about the note. She crossed her arms and said I was always making problems. She said I didn't understand. She said I wanted her to be boring and lonely. When I told her she could only see him here, with us around, she stared at her shoes and said she had homework. 10 minutes later, I heard her window creak. I went outside and caught her in the side yard with the backpack half on. We had given her a basic phone so she could call me from the bus. I installed a monitoring app that night. It showed messages going back months. There were photos of little trinkets, hearts in the captions, and a calendar of special days. One thread made my stomach drop. He told my 7-year-old they were secretly engaged. He wrote they would run away together when she turned 14, the day after her birthday, because then, no one can stop us. He wrote about new names, a small apartment near the ocean, and a list of things to bring. He told her to keep it quiet, because people would try to break them apart. He put little locks next to his lines. The messages had rules. He told her to earn points by keeping secrets, by ignoring kids her age, by not telling me about gifts. He rewarded her with videos he called educational. He said, "A grown-up relationship means we don't need parents." He sent bus schedules. He asked for a new photo of her wearing that blue dress when no one was home. I took screenshots until my hand hurt. When Mark got home, I put the phone in his hand and stepped back. He scrolled, jaw tight, not talking. We printed everything. We saved it all on a thumb drive. We called the non-emergency number first, then were transferred to a detective who asked us to come in the next morning. He listened, looked at the screenshots, and said he would petition a judge for a search warrant. He told us not to confront Justin or his mother. He told us to keep Olivia home and off devices. She stayed in the living room under a blanket and watched cartoons like it was any other sick day, but she kept glancing at the door. My phone buzzed with Justin asking if she could come over for a quick lesson. I did not answer. 2 days later, unmarked cars rolled up quietly in the afternoon. The detective knocked on our door first, asked if Olivia was inside, and had a woman from child services sit with her at our kitchen table. Across the street, officers stood by the garage. When Justin stepped out, he was in a gray hoodie and socks, a phone in his hand. They spoke to him calmly. He kept repeating that he hadn't done anything, that it was just teaching, that we were being dramatic. His mother, hair pulled back and apron on, kept saying she didn't know what was going on. The detective served the warrant. They went in. We watched from the porch while they searched. They carried out a small metal lockbox, a backpack with duct tape around the straps, and a shoebox with a slit like a bank. I could see the contents when they set them on the hood to photograph. There were fake identification cards with Olivia's photo and a different last name. There were 2 bus tickets to a city 3 states away, printed for a date 7 years from now. There were map printouts with circles around stations and a handwritten list that said, cash, chargers, clothes, snacks. There was a stack of cash bound with rubber bands. The detective counted it out on the spot while another officer filmed. 10,000 in 20s and 50s. They found a note with engagement day plan at the top. It had times for when school let out and when Mark left for night shifts, even dates for when I usually did groceries. He had a simple schedule for how to get from our street to the bus without cameras, using alleys and a construction site. There was a wig in a plastic bag. There were printed messages, like he had been keeping a record in case his phone was taken. His handwriting was careful. In the margins he had drawn hearts and arrows. He had written, "Practice calm voice." They arrested him on the porch. As they walked him to the car, he turned his head and looked at our house. Olivia peeked through the blinds. He said nothing. The detective came back inside and asked to sit at our table. He told us this was planned over months. He said the cash likely came from saving and maybe selling items. That would be part of the larger investigation. He showed us the fake IDs. My daughter's school photo, a different name, a different birthday. He said he had enough to charge for multiple crimes. The next days were interviews and calls. They brought Olivia to a child advocate center. The room had soft chairs and a camera. She sat with a woman who spoke slowly and asked clear questions. Olivia said Justin had told her about a romantic adventure. She said he promised new names and a place with a window to the ocean. She said he told her parents wouldn't understand. She believed she had a job to keep secrets to earn the day. She spoke straight, like she was reading instructions. The detective told us later this was not the first time. In his previous town, there had been an 11-year-old girl he had spent time with. Her parents found messages and moved out fast. They didn't press charges because they said it would be messy. There was no public record, just a school note about sudden withdrawal. Without a charge, there was nothing on file when they moved here. Justin arrived with a clean slate on paper. He started over. He found Olivia because she was small, quiet, and easy to flatter with attention. The case moved through juvenile court. Justin's public defender leaned on his age, on the idea that he didn't fully understand. The prosecutor showed the box with cash, the IDs with a 7-year schedule, and the messages where he gave my daughter rules. The judge watched the videos from the search. The judge listened to the forensic interviewer's report. The decision took weeks, but in the end, the premeditation and the manipulation were obvious. He was sentenced to 8 years in juvenile detention, with mandatory psychiatric evaluation and treatment. They said he would be monitored after release. There was a no-contact order for life. He looked small when they let him out, smaller than he did on our sidewalk those first bright days. His mother cried. I did not feel relief. I wrote down the dates in a notebook because I needed something concrete to hold. Olivia started therapy with a counselor who works with kids. They met twice a week at first. The work was simple and repetitive. The counselor used drawings and clear examples. They talked about boundaries in practical terms. They practiced saying no, and practiced telling an adult when something felt off, even if it felt like a betrayal. We had to explain that older kids and adults cannot have secret plans with children. We kept the phone off except during calls with me or her dad. We set up an app that mirrored messages to us automatically. We took the window lock seriously. We changed routines so there were eyes on pickups and drop-offs. Our house changed. Doors stayed open. If someone wanted to see Olivia, they came inside where we could hear every word. We told neighbors to tell us if they saw anything strange. We told the school that any change in pickup had to be signed in person. We said yes to play dates with kids her age and stayed in the same room. Olivia went back to small things: chalk on the sidewalk, board games, reading on the couch. There was no more skateboarding on the street. I keep thinking how normal it looked at first. A friendly teenager, a quiet street, rules that made me feel like we were careful. It was not enough. Predators do not show up looking like villains. They show up with stickers and patience and schedules that feel helpful. Age gaps matter. Attention feels harmless until it is not. We learn to watch the pattern, not the smile. If you are a parent, you cannot set and forget. You need to check the phone. You need to look in the backpack. You need to listen when your kid's words sound memorized. You need to be willing to be the bad guy for a while so your kid stays safe. We trust, but we check. We let Olivia build friendships with guidance, not alone. We follow up on older kids who want to spend one-on-one time. We ask why, and we verify. I wish our lesson did not come this way, with cash and fake names in a metal box across the street. But this is how it came. We changed the locks and the routines. We stand outside during bus drop-off. We ask questions, even when it makes dinners quiet. We know now that grooming can happen in daylight, in front yards, with polite words and neat notebooks. We do not assume. We verify, all the time. I'd been renting a 2-story house in the Memphis suburbs for about a year when it happened. Last Tuesday night, a storm pushed hard across the neighborhood, and the gutters sounded like they were boiling. I had Netflix on in the living room, volume up enough to cover the rattle of rain. The coffee table had a half-eaten microwave dinner, the remote, and my phone face down. The porch light was on a timer. Around 10, the first knock came. It wasn't a polite tap. It was 5 or 6 heavy blows, spaced like a warning. The door shook in the frame. I sat still on the couch and watched the episode keep playing. I didn't know many people on my street, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Delivery drivers texted. Nobody I wanted to see would show up in that weather without calling first. The knocking stopped, and the house went back to the hum of the AC and the hiss of rain. I waited a minute, then another, and told myself it was a mistake. Maybe someone drunk. Maybe the wrong address on a rideshare. I reached for my phone, then put it down. I didn't want to encourage whoever it was by moving near the door. 5 minutes later, the second round started. Louder, same rhythm. It carried over the thunder and echoed down the hall like someone pounding a metal drum. The peephole sat at the end of a straight line past the coat hooks and the narrow entry rug. I stood up but didn't move at first. My keys were on the console table next to the deadbolt. The chain was on. The light threw a dull oval on the wet welcome mat. When it stopped again, I went to the door and pressed my eye to the glass. The street was a smear of water and reflections. Right in front stood a thin man in a black hoodie. He looked maybe 40, maybe older under the wet. The hood was up, stuck to his skull. His face didn't match the rest of him. It was tight, like he was clenching every muscle at once. His jaw jumped. His lips were set in a straight pale line. He didn't try the handle. He didn't speak. Rain poured off the bill of his hood, ran down his cheekbones, and dripped off his chin. He kept his head tilted just enough that I was sure he was staring straight at the peephole. The porch light made his eyes look like glass. I couldn't read anything there. No panic. No stumble. Just a fixed focus that made my scalp prickle. I stepped back from the door until my shoulder touched the coat hooks. I didn't want the floor to creak. The TV kept playing, and dumb behind me. A thin water line crept under the threshold from where the rain blew sideways. It formed a dark crescent on the wood. I stayed very still and counted to 30. The knocking didn't come back right away. When it did, the blows landed faster and harder, like someone trying to keep time. The deadbolt rattled. A picture frame trembled and ticked against the drywall. I breathed through my nose and stared at the peephole from 3 feet away. I didn't look again. I didn't want him to think I was moving toward the lock. I waited it out because I didn't see any better option. Eventually, the pounding stopped. I stood there until the quiet stretched so long it got heavy. The rain kept at it. I checked the hour on the TV and saw 10:23. I stayed downstairs another 10 minutes with the hall light off, listening for footsteps in the gravel or glass flexing in a window. Nothing new happened. The air felt cooler where the water had slid in, so I wiped the threshold with a towel and pushed a rug against the crack. I brushed my teeth in the half bath so I didn't have to pass the front door again. The storm moved in bursts, then went quiet, then hit the siding like a bag of nails. I turned off the living room TV, locked the back door, checked the sliding handle twice, and took the stairs up slow, one hand on the rail so it wouldn't groan. The house had that empty sound where you hear your own steps die out. At the top, I paused and listened again. There was only the roof noise and the far rumble that shakes the panes after each flash. I kept the light low. My bedroom sits over the living room and faces the street. The blinds are the thin white slats from the hardware store, and they never fully close at the edges. The sill has a hairline crack from last winter's cold. I always mean to fix it and never do. I changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants and tossed my damp socks in the hamper. The clock on my nightstand showed 11:14. I checked my phone and saw a spam text and an email from work about tomorrow's meeting. I set an alarm and put the phone on the charger. In the bathroom, the fan buzzed and the light put a dull ring on the tile. I kept it quick. No floss. I wanted to be done with the night. Back by the bed, I glanced toward the window out of habit. The blinds were tilted halfway down. Between two slats, I saw a dark shape that wasn't part of the tree line across the street. I leaned a little to get a clean angle. The same man in the black hoodie stood in the middle of my lawn. He was centered on the wet grass, like he had paced it out and found the exact middle. The rain pounded his shoulders and streamed off him, but he didn't move. He was staring up at my window. He faced my house. Not the street. Not the sidewalk. Me. His head was tilted back, eyes on my window. His arms hung straight down at his sides like he didn't know what hands were for. The way he held himself was wrong, like a statue someone had carried out and set down. No sway, no shift of weight, no adjustment to the water running into his shoes. The wind pushed sheets of rain sideways, and he didn't blink. I watched him long enough to count 3 slow breaths. I didn't want to step closer to the glass. I didn't want my shadow moving on the blinds. The streetlight at the corner made a faint halo on the brim of his hood. His mouth wasn't moving. His chest wasn't obvious. There was only that stare pinned to one spot, like a level bubble holding dead center. The sight made my stomach drop because everything about how he stood said trouble. There wasn't a reason for a stranger to choose my yard and fix on my window at that hour in that weather. I ran quick checks in my head. Doors locked, back gate latched, garage closed. The answers didn't help. My heart rate kicked. I stepped to the cord and twisted my wrist. I quickly closed the blinds and tried to convince myself he'd be gone soon. I couldn't sleep after I closed the blinds. I left the bedroom light off and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the storm push against the siding. The house clicked as it cooled. Every 20 minutes I stood up and bent one slat with a finger to check the lawn. He was still there. Same spot. Head tilted up. Water running off his hood. Arms down. No umbrella. No sign he felt the cold or the wet. I counted to 30 and let the slat fall back. At midnight, I checked again. No change. A gust pushed the rain sideways and made the streetlight wobble. He didn't react. Around 1, the wind calmed and the rain turned steady, like a hose. I looked again. He was a dark line on pale grass. My upstairs light made a faint reflection in his eyes. I didn't like that I could see the white from across the yard. I went to the hall for a minute, then came back and checked through a different gap in the blinds. Same posture, like he was measured and set. By 2, I stood in the bathroom with the fan off so I could listen. No voices, no cars, no footsteps, just rain. I thought about calling the police then. My phone was on the nightstand with the non-emergency number saved from when I moved in. I picked it up, set it down, picked it up again. I wasn't sure what I would even say. A man is standing outside. He isn't breaking anything. He isn't yelling. I wasn't sure if someone standing on a public sidewalk counted as a crime. I told myself I would call if he came to the door again. Around 3, I looked again. The street was empty except for him and a trash bin 2 houses down that had blown into the gutter. He had not moved. I tried to see smoke, but the rain made it impossible. I laid down and set another alarm for 5. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and tracked the minutes. At 5, I checked, and he was still there. The grass around him looked darker and matted, even from upstairs. The storm started to lighten at the edges. The streetlights flicked off. The sky turned a dull gray. At 6, the birds started under the eaves. At 6:30, the first car went by, slow, tires cutting wakes in the water. He didn't look at it. I watched the car brake at the stop sign and move on. When my alarm went off at 7, I went straight to the window and opened the blinds halfway. The lawn was empty. Water stood in shallow puddles. The middle section looked chewed up. On the patch where he had been, pale ends dotted the grass. Several cigarette butts had washed together in a small drift beside the walkway. The line where his boots had pressed into the yard made a rough oval. The grass there looked torn and laid flat. I got dressed and went downstairs. The front door had a faint water stain under the weather strip from last night. I unlocked it and stepped out. The air smelled like wet asphalt and smoke. Up close, the marks were clear. Boot prints in the mud pointed toward the middle of the yard and overlapped a dozen times. They were less clear near the edges, like he had shifted his feet but never stepped far. The grass was churned into a thin paste under the treads. Around the tightest cluster, I counted at least a dozen cigarette butts. Some filters were bent. Some still had a strip of paper clinging to them. They were swollen from the rain, but not gone. The ash had washed into gray streaks on the concrete. One butt was mashed into the dirt at the exact center of the trampled circle. The prints showed he had turned a little now and then, but never left that part of the lawn. I walked the curb and looked up and down the street. A delivery van hissed past the corner. A woman in a blue rain jacket walked a dog on the far side. I picked up the butts with a grocery bag over my hand and dropped them in the trash. I took photos of the prints and the worn grass. My phone camera showed the shape better than my eyes. It was a clear patch of damage. When Mrs. Chen came out to get her paper, I told her what happened. I kept it short. She listened and nodded and said she had seen a man like that near the Johnsons last week, and 2 nights ago near the duplexes by the bus stop. She said he lingered by mailboxes and stood across from driveways. She thought he might be casing houses for burglaries, but this felt different to me. He didn't look like he was making a plan. He looked locked in. I went back inside and checked the windows and doors again. I tested each latch. I tested the sliding door bar. I checked the garage side door and the back gate. Then I ordered a small security camera online for same-day delivery. In the afternoon, I mounted it above the porch, pointed at the front yard. I ran the cable along the trim and stapled the slack. I paired it to my phone and set motion alerts for the whole view. I called the non-emergency police line and told the dispatcher what I had seen, the timeline, the prints, and the cigarettes. She took my information, said a patrol car would pass more often overnight, and that without more concrete evidence of a threat, there wasn't much they could do. She suggested I save the photos and any footage, and to call back if he returned. I wrote the report number on a sticky note and put it by the door. That night, I left the porch light on and kept the blinds tilted down. I watched the camera feed on my phone every hour until midnight. Nothing. Just a wet yard and that section of flattened grass. I slept in short blocks and woke to check the feed again. Nothing moved except the neighbor's cat at 3:10. 2 days later, I was at my kitchen table going through emails when a patrol car rolled slow past my house and stopped at the corner. The camera caught it first. I stepped to the window. A second car turned onto the street and parked behind the first. They sat there for a minute, then both pulled away. 10 minutes after that, the non-emergency number called me back. The officer asked if I could come down to the substation to look at a photo lineup. At the station, they told me they had arrested a man about 6 blocks from my house for disturbing the peace. He had been yelling at a parked car and knocking on doors. They said his name was Kevin Wright. He had been released recently from a psychiatric facility. He had been wandering the neighborhood at night and fixating on random houses and people. They showed me a printout of 6 faces. I picked him out. Mrs. Chen was there too. She picked the same one. The officer said Wright had been living out of his car, a rusty sedan with fast food wrappers in the back seat and a blanket folded on the passenger side. In the trunk they found spiral notebooks. The pages held tight handwriting with dates, times, and block names. There were small maps with arrows and notes about who came home late, who left early, which lights stayed on. My street showed up 5 times. My address had a box around it. According to the officer, Wright had focused on my house because the upstairs light stayed on late. He had written that it meant someone was awake for him, that it was a signal to come. He had underlined the time next to it and circled it twice. The officer said they were going to hold him for evaluation and notify his family. He told me to keep my cameras up and to call if anything else happened. I went home and stood in the doorway and looked at the yard. The grass was starting to stand up again, but the circle still showed as a lighter patch. I opened the camera app and scrolled through the clips. I watched the empty yard at 2 a.m., the cat at 3:10, the patrol car at 9:06. I changed the batteries in the sensor and checked the screws on the mount. I locked the door and checked it again. I'm just grateful he never tried to actually break in, but I still check that security camera feed every morning. It's unsettling to know that someone can develop an obsession with you for absolutely no reason at all. I work the late shift at the 24-hour Walgreens on Oak Avenue, and I usually walk home to my apartment 3 blocks away. Last Thursday, my shift ended at 11:30 p.m. I forgot to check the weather, so I didn't bring an umbrella. When I stepped outside, the rain was heavy and cold. It slapped my cheeks and soaked my sleeves in seconds. I tucked my chin, zipped my jacket, and started a quick walk. The strip of stores on Oak was dark and closed. A neon pharmacy cross blinked in the window behind me. My breath came out in short white puffs and vanished in the wet air. The sidewalk was shiny and slick. Water pushed along the curb like it had somewhere important to go. My sneakers were wet inside and squeaked. Halfway home, I realized someone was walking behind me. I didn't see him at first because the rain made this constant noise, like static, and I was busy watching for deep puddles. But I caught a shape in the glass of a bus shelter. When I sped up at the corner, the steps behind me sped up too. When I slowed to avoid a puddle, the steps slowed. Cold water slipped down the back of my collar and settled between shoulder blades and made me flinch. I told myself it was nothing. It was late. People still move around in the rain. I kept my pace and turned left onto Park Street. The block is mostly old brick buildings, 4 floors, short steps, iron railings. A few windows were lit. Blue TV light flickered in one. The streetlights made the rain look like beads on wires. My building has a small green awning over the entrance and a metal door with a narrow glass pane. I stopped under the overhang and shook my arms to get some water off. The awning didn't help much. Water kept dripping from the edge onto the rubber mat. I reached for my keys. That is when I heard footsteps right behind me, close now, not out on the sidewalk. I turned. A man in a black jacket stood near the door, hood up, face shadowed. The jacket was shiny with rain. No umbrella. No bag. He was quiet. He didn't look away or smile. He just stayed there, like he was waiting for me to move first. The rain sounds bounced off the brick, so it was the only noise between us. I picked the brass key for the main entrance from the ring. My fingers were cold and the key slipped once. It scraped the plate and then went in. The lock turned with a dull click. I pushed the door and stepped into the small lobby. The smell was wet carpet and old cleaner. Behind me, the door started to shut on its closer. I paused and caught it with my palm. I held it open after a short hesitation, assuming he lived here too. He moved to follow me in without a word and without meeting my eyes. The lobby is narrow. On the left, dented mailboxes with thin paper labels. On the right, a corkboard with curled flyers for a missing bike and a used couch. A plastic plant sits under the mirror in the corner. The mat was soaked and left dark footprints behind every step. I walked to the inner door. It has a black keycard reader and a push bar. Someone had taped a "wipe your feet" sign to the glass, and the ink ran from the moisture. I took my wallet out for the card while more water dripped from my sleeves. I tapped the card against the reader. It gave a small beep and a green light. The lock clicked. The inner door is heavy and stiff. I pushed it open, felt the closer start to pull back, and then held it with my forearm. I looked back for a second. He stood there, expectant, not even pretending to pat his pockets for a card. He waited for me to hold it. He still didn't say thanks. Something about the silence bothered me, but I was wet and tired and just wanted to get upstairs. I let him through again. We entered the main hallway. The air was cooler from the building's AC. Fluorescent lights hummed above us. Water ticked off both of us onto the pale tiles. My apartment is on the 3rd floor. The elevator and the stairwell are down the hall, then around a turn. I kept my keys in my hand. I could feel the raised dots on the plastic card with my thumb. I thought about dry socks and a towel by the heater. The man stayed behind me at the same distance, not far, not near, steady. We walked past the fire extinguisher cabinet with cracked glass and the framed pest control schedule. A faded exit plan hung a little crooked by the corner. A leak had stained one ceiling tile brown near the turn. I could hear the elevator machinery somewhere, a faint metal whine, and a relay click behind a wall when somebody on another floor pushed a button. No doors opened, no voices, no TVs, no music. Just the soft noise of our wet shoes and the low drone of the air system. Somewhere a pipe ticked in the walls, a slow drip that counted off the empty hallway at night. I rounded the corner. The key card was still in my hand. My backpack strap dug into my shoulder. I adjusted my grip so the card wouldn't slip to the floor. In the reflection on a glass frame, I saw his hood and part of his cheek, but not his eyes. No phone in his hands, no groceries, no packages. I reminded myself people forget their cards or hold the door for each other here all the time. He didn't change his pace. He stayed close behind me as we walked toward the elevator bank. The elevator button glowed dim red when I pressed it. Water ran off my sleeves and formed a small puddle by my shoes. He stood at my shoulder, not touching, not speaking. The doors opened, and we both stepped in. The air inside smelled like damp metal and rubber. I hit 3. He didn't press anything. He moved to the back corner and faced me while the doors slid shut. The car hummed and climbed. I watched the numbers change above the door because I didn't want to look at him. My jacket dripped onto the floor. 1, 2. I could feel his eyes on my hands and my keys. I kept the key card between my fingers and my other keys in a fist so they didn't clack. The light from the ceiling buzzed. No music, no voice, just the steady sound of the motor and our breathing. When the doors opened on 3, I stepped out first. The hallway was quiet and smelled like dust and detergent. Beige carpet, low ceiling, the same framed fire escape map halfway down. I walked left, My unit, 3B, is toward the end near the stairwell door. My wet shoes left marks on the carpet. I didn't hear anyone else on the floor. I slowed at my door and got the right key ready. I turned it and felt the latch pull back. I glanced over my shoulder to see where he would go. He hadn't picked a direction. He stood in the middle of the hall, 10 feet away, hood still up, still watching. He didn't pretend to look at another door or check his pockets. He just stood there. I slid inside my apartment and pulled the door closed. I should have locked it right then. My head was on getting out of the wet clothes and warming up. I set my keys and wallet on the little dish by the entry table. I kicked off my soaked sneakers and left them on the mat. My living room was dark. The blinds were shut, the TV off. I went straight down the short hallway to my bedroom. In the bedroom, I turned on the lamp and stripped out of my wet jeans and sweatshirt. I threw them in a pile by the hamper and pulled on dry pajama pants and a long-sleeve shirt. My socks were soggy and clung to my feet. I peeled them off and rubbed my feet with a towel I kept on the chair. The apartment was quiet except for the building heat clicking in the wall and a car passing outside. I reached for a fresh pair of socks in the drawer. That was when I heard my front door open and close. The sound was clear in the small apartment. A short creak from the hinges, then the latch settling. I didn't move for a second. I had left it unlocked. Footsteps came next. Not cautious, not rushing, just steady. The floorboards in the living room have a slight give, and I could feel it through the bedroom floor. A drawer slid, then another. Cabinet doors knocked shut. I picked up my phone from the nightstand, went to the bedroom door, and turned the lock. It's a simple push button. I pressed it until I felt it click. Then I backed up to the corner and dialed 911. I spoke low and close to the phone so the sound wouldn't carry. 911, what is your emergency? Someone is in my apartment, I said. I'm locked in my bedroom, 3rd floor, Park Street. I'm alone. Stay on the line. Officers are on the way. Do you hear them now? Yes, I whispered. A drawer slid open in the living room again. A dull thunk like he set something down. Paper rustled. He opened the TV stand doors. I could picture the stack of manuals falling sideways. My coat rack tapped the wall once. He moved into the kitchen. I heard the silverware tray rattle. A cabinet door. The fridge door opened and closed. Plastic containers shifted. The dispatcher kept me calm with short questions. What is your name? Are you injured? Is there anyone else with you? I answered quick. No extra words. I kept my ear toward the door. The footsteps came back to the hall. He paused by the bathroom. The fan stayed off, so I could hear the cabinet door under the sink. The mirror clacked as it moved on its bracket. Something small clicked against porcelain, maybe the toothbrush cup. He wasn't running. He wasn't talking. He was just checking everything in reach. Officers are 3 minutes out, the dispatcher said. Do not leave the room. Keep the door locked. I kept my hand around the knob anyway. I heard my closet door in the living room roll on its track. The sliding door sticks unless you lift it a little. He must have found that because it made the same scraping sound it always makes. Hangers shifted. A box thumped. He reached the short hall by my bedroom and bathroom. His steps were close now. He didn't try my bedroom handle. He opened the bathroom door, then the small linen closet. He let it shut. He stayed about 10 minutes, maybe a little less. I watched the phone timer climb while he moved. He never spoke. He didn't bang or force anything. He treated it like he had time. Then the steps went back to the living room. The front door opened. A pause. It closed. I heard the latch catch this time. I waited with the dispatcher until the officers knocked. They announced themselves and used my name. I unlocked the bedroom door and let them in. Their boots were wet from the rain. They checked the apartment room by room, and then the hallway. He was gone. The officers took a report at my kitchen table. One walked me through the times and the path he took. The other radioed for the building to be checked. They looked at my door. No damage. They noted the boxes moved in my closet, the mail spread on the coffee table, the kitchen drawers a little open. My bathroom items were out of place. My brush was on the counter instead of in the cup. The mirror had a smudge on one corner. They dusted for fingerprints on the doorknobs, the kitchen counter, the TV stand, the bathroom mirror edge. Fine gray powder left a film where they worked. They lifted a few prints, but they said a lot of them could be mine. One officer asked if our hallway had cameras. I told them no. Our building never added them, just the card reader downstairs. Without cameras, they said it could be hard to identify him. They asked for a description. I told them what I saw. Black jacket, hood up, average build, no visible tattoos, no bag. I explained the elevator, the way he followed me down the hall and stopped 10 feet from my door. I told them I thought it was the same man. I admitted I had held the doors for him because it felt rude not to. The detective who came the next day repeated the same questions. He said the man might have been testing my routines, checking if I lived alone, checking locks, checking how fast police would respond. He said sometimes they leave after the first time and come back later when they know your habits. He told me to change my locks, add a bar to the door, and never let anyone in unless I knew them. He was direct about it. "Do not hold the door," he said. "It's not worth it." I bought a new deadbolt and a door chain that afternoon. I put a piece of tape over the peephole so I could see if it moved. I changed my walk home to a different street and carried my umbrella even when the sky was clear. I kept a chair braced under the handle at night for a while, but I didn't sleep much. Every small sound in the building made me listen and wait. I told my landlord I wanted out. I didn't argue about the fee. I packed my clothes and small stuff in 3 trips. I kept the boxes stacked in the living room and carried them down in the daylight. My dad brought his pickup, and we loaded it in one go. I turned in my keys and didn't look down the hallway when I left. I moved back in with my parents across town. The case never went anywhere that I heard. The prints didn't match anything obvious. There were no cameras to pull. I stopped closing at Walgreens for a while and traded shifts. I added a chain to my parents' door and watched the driveway at night. If someone came to the building door when I visited, I didn't touch it. I learned to trust the first warning signs. Silence is an answer. A stranger who expects access will expect more later. The whole thing happened fast. It was just a walk home in the rain, a door held open, a simple mistake with the lock. It was enough. Sometimes what seems like normal courtesy puts you in danger. I keep that in mind now, and I keep my doors locked. When I was 19, I signed up for an elective psychology course because I needed 3 credits. The room had buzzing lights and plastic chairs. On the first day, the professor paired us for practical exercises. I got matched with a quiet guy named Connor. He sat down across from me and stared. He didn't say a single word during the 2-hour class. We were supposed to trade basic details and fill a short worksheet. I asked him simple questions and kept my voice light. He never answered. His pen stayed capped, his knee bounced, his eyes stayed on me. I told myself he was shy. I wrote our answers myself so we wouldn't fall behind. The professor drifted past twice and didn't notice a problem. When class ended, I said, "See you next week." He stared like he wanted to reply, then looked away. I walked back to my dorm, took the stairs, and unlocked my room. The hall smelled like cleaner. I opened my laptop and phone to check messages before dinner. Notifications filled both screens. 12 new messages across different apps, all from Connor. They came within minutes of each other, timestamps stacked, 2:11, 2:12, 2:13. Campus email, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, even an account I hadn't used in years. Each asked the same things: coffee, study, hang out. One had a smiley face and hearts. I hadn't told him any usernames. I typed a short reply on email. I said I was busy this week and wished him a good semester. I left the other messages unread. I figured he was overeager and nervous about the assignment. I shut my laptop and went to brush my teeth. I politely declined his invitations and figured that would be the end of it. But the next week he started showing up after my lectures. After sociology, he stood by the vending machines, watching me leave. After psychology, he was near the exit, eyes locked on the door. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. By Thursday, I changed stairs and doors. He adjusted every time. Sometimes he followed a few steps behind and then stopped. Sometimes I turned a corner and he was already there, leaning on a rail like he had arrived early. I kept walking and looked straight ahead. Notes began sliding under my dorm room door. The paper came from a small spiral pad. The handwriting was neat, rounded. He wrote about my hair, my shoes, my laugh when I answered a question. He drew hearts and signed his name. One note said, "We are meant to be together." Another listed my best qualities, line by line, like he was writing a report. I stacked the papers on my desk and locked my door. The next day, 2 more notes were waiting when I got back from lab. My floor was quiet when I bent to pick them up. He also started calling. First one number, then another, then another. 30 to 40 calls a day. My phone rang during meals, lectures, and showers. I set it to vibrate and put it face down. At first, there were no voicemails, only hang-ups that kept the counter climbing. When I stopped answering altogether, the voicemails started. He described what I was wearing that day, down to small details. Blue jacket with a silver zipper, he said. Black shirt with tiny white dots. He also described the routes I took. "You went out the back door and cut along the side path," he said. "You took the south stairs and used the side gate." His voice was flat, steady, like he was reading notes. He never laughed. He never sounded unsure. I varied everything I could. I left classes early or late. I waited in restrooms until the hallway went quiet. I switched which doors I used and which pockets held my keys. I watched reflections in glass and kept my right hand free. The notes kept coming anyway. Twice a day, sometimes more. Now he added times to the compliments. 10:06 a.m. You held the elevator. 1:42 p.m. You dropped your pen. He underlined words and drew more hearts. He wrote that we already had proof we fit together. Small things began to stand out that I had never noticed before. A scuff on the push bar, a shoe mark by the stairs, a candy wrapper under the fountain. None of it proved anything. I logged it anyway. My door peephole had a nick in the plastic ring. Maybe it had always been there. One day the calls hit 42. The screen showed a wall of missed numbers and red badges. I listened to a single voicemail long enough to hear the exact time I left math and deleted it. Another one arrived seconds later. The phone pulsed with each new alert. I started changing my look to break the pattern. Different jacket, different hat, different shoes. It didn't help. Within an hour, his voicemail named the new item and where he saw it. He said which pocket held my student ID. He said which notebook I used in which class. Just after sunset one evening, my phone rang again and again until the voicemail icon appeared. I tapped it and stood between my bed and my desk to hear it. His voice listed my route, then my clothes, then the corner where I stopped to tie my shoe. He ended with, "See you tomorrow." 2 minutes later, the phone rang again. I kept my key between my fingers when I walked. I learned which doors closed slow and which slammed. I memorized the camera domes on the ceilings. I wasn't being dramatic. I wanted to move from door to door fast. By then, there was no doubt. He wasn't guessing, and he wasn't repeating something we both told each other in class. He had my schedule down to minutes. He knew the routes and the doors. It was clear he was following and watching me constantly. I went to the dean's office with a stack of notes and a log of calls. I kept it simple: dates, times, screenshots. The dean listened, nodded, and said they would have a talk with him about appropriate behavior. They took copies and told me to keep documenting. I left with that sentence repeating in my head because it didn't sound like a plan. The next morning, my phone buzzed before my first class. A text from an unknown number with a photo attached. It was me sleeping in my dorm bed. The angle was from inside the room, near my desk. I could see my own backpack in the corner and my shoes by the door. The caption said, "You look beautiful when you sleep. Why did you complain? We're meant for each other." I stared at the photo, looked at my door chain, looked at the window lock. I didn't waste time. I threw clothes in a bag and called a friend. I left my dorm key at the front desk and didn't go back. By evening, I moved into a small apartment with 2 friends off campus. Their place had a deadbolt and a chain. I took the couch for the first nights and kept a lamp on. I contacted a lawyer the next day about a restraining order. I brought my logs and the photo. The lawyer was calm and direct. They said I needed more documented evidence of threats. "Keep collecting," they said. "Keep reporting." I saved everything to a folder and backed it up to a drive. It didn't matter that I moved. Connor found the new address fast. First, it was a small gift bag on the welcome mat, a silver bracelet in a velvet box, and a handwritten note about how happy he was I had come home. Then a plush bear with a ribbon. Then a bigger bag with printed photos of me taken across campus and on the sidewalk outside a grocery store near the apartment. None were posed. In one, I was carrying a sack of oranges. In another, I was unlocking the apartment gate. He left them early in the morning and late at night. No signature, just hearts and my name. We bought a basic camera kit that same day. Battery-powered units with motion detection. One for the front door, one for the back stairwell, one facing the second-floor landing. We put up a small sign that said "Recording in Progress." We reported every drop-off to campus police and also to the city police, including the text with the photo from inside my room. We got incident numbers and the names of officers. I started keeping a notebook by the door to log times. Connor adjusted again. He started showing up everywhere. He was outside my workplace when I locked up at 9. He stood across the street from the coffee shop where my roommate studied. He pressed the call button at the apartment gate and hung up before we picked up. When I drove to my parents' house for a weekend, a car stayed 2 vehicles back on the freeway for an hour. I saw the same car pass our street twice after I pulled into my parents' driveway. My dad stood on the porch and wrote down the plate. I sent that in with the next report. 2 weeks after I moved in, my roommate shook my shoulder at 3 a.m. Her whisper was tight. Someone was trying to get in through the second-floor window in the small bedroom we used for storage. We killed the lamp and listened. The sound was metal against frame, a scrape, then pressure. The window latch clicked. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I gave the address and said we had cameras. My roommate went to the hallway and watched the live feed on her screen. It showed a figure on the fire escape, shoulder first through the window, slow, careful. The dispatcher stayed on the line and told us to stay in the locked bedroom and keep the door between us and the window. Sirens grew fast. The feed caught the reflection of red and blue, and then voices in the alley. Footsteps on the metal stairs. A thump as someone hit the frame. The dispatcher said officers were on scene. We heard police and hands. We didn't move until an officer knocked and announced by name. When we opened the front door, 2 officers were in the hall. Another officer was at the back with his light up. They led us to the small bedroom. The window was halfway open. Connor was halfway through the opening when they arrived. 1 leg in, 1 leg out. He had a backpack on the floor under the window. They photographed it, zipped it, and logged it. They took him out in cuffs while he stared down at the tile and didn't say a word. The police asked for all of our footage, reports, voicemails, and the photo from inside the dorm. They brought a property form and gave us a card with a case number. They served a warrant for his dorm room the same day. Later, we heard what they found from the detective assigned to the case. Thousands of photos of me printed and sorted by date, many from places I didn't realize he had been. Journals that laid out daily routines, class times, places I like to buy groceries, and lists labeled "Future Together." In a locked footlocker, they found zip ties, small unlabeled vials that tested as sedatives, and several fake identification cards with my last name attached to different first names. They bagged everything. They talked to the dean. The calls from the dean's office stopped, and the tone of the emails changed. I met with the detective, a prosecutor, and a mental health evaluator in a small room at the station. I stuck to facts. I signed forms. I turned over the drive with my backups. The evaluator asked simple questions and explained they would be assessing whether he understood his actions and whether he posed an ongoing risk. I kept my answers short and exact. The psychiatric evaluation came back with words I had never heard before. Erotomania. They said it was a delusional disorder where a person believes someone else is in love with them even when it is clear they are not. They said his journals and interviews showed he believed my smile on the first day of class, and my polite tone meant we were already bonded. They said the photos and messages were his way of getting to know me for a relationship he felt was real. He didn't see his behavior as stalking. He saw it as proof. There was a hearing. I sat behind a short wooden rail. He came in with deputies and stared at the table in front of him. I didn't look at him. The prosecutor laid out what happened. The surveillance, the entries to my dorm, the window, the backpack, the footlocker. The evaluator gave the diagnosis and the assessment about risk and capacity. The judge ordered psychiatric treatment in a secure facility. The order prohibited any contact with me, my family, my roommates, or my workplace, and barred him from campus and the surrounding area. They served copies to the university and to city police. I stayed with my friends through the end of the semester, but I did not relax. I didn't go back to the dorms. I kept the cameras up and checked them every morning. I used different routes and varied my routine even though he was in custody. I wrote final exams and then packed everything again. I transferred to a different university the next semester. It wasn't dramatic. I filed the forms. I got a new student ID. I learned the path to a different library. I forwarded the protective order to the new campus police. I memorized the location of the nightly escort office. I kept the folder of evidence in a drawer and left it there. I wish I could say the system moved fast, but it only moved after the window. Every email before that felt like a copy of a copy, like no one wanted to make a decision. People told me to document, to wait, to see if it got worse. It did. I think about that first pairing in class sometimes when I open a notebook. A normal assignment turned into a months-long safety plan. It taught me that random class pairings can turn dangerous, and that institutions often don't take stalking seriously until it escalates to attempted kidnapping. I was 28, and my evenings were simple. Work ended at 7. I drove 2 miles down Maple, parked under the crooked light pole, and swiped into the fitness center. Tuesdays at 8 were quiet. The front desk guy scrolled his phone. I put my water bottle in the cup holder, set the stationary bike to a steady pace, and watched the numbers tick up. The room felt hollow when it was that empty, all the machine lights blinking like little eyes. About 5 minutes in, a man walked in and crossed the empty row of bikes. There were at least 15 open machines, but he chose the one directly next to mine. He didn't say hello. He set a towel across the handlebars and sat, his knee almost brushing the metal of my machine. I saw him in the mirrored wall ahead, our reflections stacked. He pedaled so slow the sensor kept pausing his timer. I tried to focus on cadence and breathing. The ceiling fans hummed. Every time I lifted my eyes to the mirror to check posture, his were already there. He wasn't watching TV. He wasn't on his phone. He just looked at me, steady and flat, like he was checking a level bubble. His feet made lazy half circles. He kept dabbing at his forehead with the towel without breaking a sweat. The minutes felt slow. When I shifted position, he shifted too, like he wanted our frames to line up in the glass. If I adjusted resistance, he moved his hand the same way, but his dial never changed. Once he leaned forward so far, his shoulder almost crossed into my space, staring through me into the mirror. I finished my program and cooled down. I wiped the bike, clipped my bottle onto my bag strap, and walked to the weight section. The mirrors there ran floor to ceiling. Music played low from a ceiling speaker, just a thump with no lyrics, the kind that makes time feel longer. I picked the seated row, set the pin, and started pulling. He followed. He didn't even try to hide it. He sat at the machine closest to me, set the pin to a number that didn't match his build, and barely moved the stack while looking at my reflection. I moved again. He moved again. Any free space I took, he took the next nearest one. He stood too close when I stretched, his shoe toe angled toward me. When I paused to drink, he lifted his bottle too, at the same time. He didn't speak. He just watched. Every small action felt measured, like he wanted me to know I couldn't shift without him tracking it. I changed to dumbbells for a last set, hoping he'd get bored if I kept it light. He didn't. He planted himself at the rack and pretended to compare weights while blocking my return. I checked the clock on the far wall. 40 minutes. I racked the dumbbells and knew I was done. I decided to cut it short. My plan was simple: pack up while he was busy, leave, and get into my car before he realized I was gone. He was in the middle of a fake set on the cable column, staring through the mirror again. I rolled my bag strap onto my shoulder, slipped my keys into my palm, and walked out at a normal pace. Outside, the lot was lit by tall sodium lamps that made everything look pale. My car was 3 rows out, angled under the light pole with the taped-up base. I hit unlock and watched the blink of the turn signals. No one else was around except a couple leaving from the pool, their flip-flops slapping. I didn't look back. I opened my door, tossed my bag into the back, and got in. I clicked the belt and put my hand to the ignition. The passenger door jerked open so hard the dome light flickered. He slid into the seat fast, already talking. His towel was draped back around his neck, and I could smell cheap body spray over sweat. He smiled in a way that didn't match his eyes and said he'd noticed me before. That he'd been there the last few weeks too. That we had the same hours. He said, "We should get dinner tonight." His voice sounded like he was making normal plans with a friend. I said, Get out. My hand was on the belt latch. He kept going like he hadn't heard. He told me there was a place 2 blocks over that did good tacos, but if I didn't like tacos, a diner stayed open late on Oak. He said he knew I'd been checking him out on the bikes and that I didn't need to be shy. His hand went to my dash, tapping a slow beat against the plastic like he belonged there. I said it again, louder. Get out of my car. He finally looked at my hands, then at the center console, then back up. He talked about how the diner had pie, and how he liked pie. His tone never changed. He listed foods like he was reading a menu. The lot felt too quiet. The flip-flop couple had gone. The front desk guy wasn't visible through the glass anymore. I could hear the buzz of the light pole and a faint hiss of traffic. I reached for my phone in the cup holder without breaking eye contact. My fingers hit the case edge and slid under it. He moved quicker than I expected. His hand grabbed my wrist, his thumb pressing the tendon against the hard plastic of the console. His palm was dry and strong. Pressure tightened, and my fingers opened. The phone tipped and tapped back into the holder. He leaned a little closer, lowering his voice until it felt like it pressed against my ear. He told me not to play hard to get. I yanked my hand away, shoved my key into the ignition, and started the engine. The dash lit up. The warning chime for the open door beeped. I said, "I'm going to the police station if you don't get out right now." He leaned back like he was settling in for a ride and laughed. He said I was being dramatic, and that he just wanted to talk, like it was casual. I put my foot on the brake, shifted into reverse, and felt the car rock. The door was still open, the dome light on. I started backing out. The gravel at the edge of the space popped under the tires. He looked at the moving pavement, then at the open door, and made a choice. He grabbed his towel, jerked his legs up, and hopped out to avoid the swing. His shoe scuffed, then he lost balance and went down on a knee and a hand. I didn't stop. He yelled something and slapped the door as it swung wider. I straightened the wheel, rolled out of the lane, and pulled forward toward the exit. In the rear view, he was standing, rubbing his palm, mouth moving. I turned onto Maple and drove. The fan blew hot air because the engine was still cold. I didn't look for him in the mirrors after the second block. At the light, I checked the locks. They were down. I turned into my lot, parked under another lamp, and killed the engine. I grabbed my bag and keys and went inside. The hallway smelled like detergent and dust. My apartment door had a deadbolt and a chain. I locked both. I checked the slider to the balcony. I checked the kitchen window over the sink. I went room to room and did it again. I set my phone on the nightstand and left the bathroom light on. I lay down in my clothes and slept. In the morning, I got up early and drove back to the gym. I parked close to the front. The lobby smelled like rubber and disinfectant. The front desk guy was there, plus a woman I hadn't seen before. I asked for the manager. He came out in a polo with the logo embroidered on it and a ring of keys on his belt. I told him the basics. A guy followed me from machine to machine, watched me, cornered me in my car, wouldn't get out. I kept the details clear and short. The manager asked if I knew the man's name. I said no. He asked if I had a photo. I said no. He said without a name or membership details, they couldn't take action. He said, "We can review the security footage." He typed something into a computer. He said if I remembered any small detail, I should email him. He handed me a card with the gym's address printed on it. I looked at the camera above the door and then at the long hall of machines. I told him I expected them to do something. He repeated the part about the footage and said they take member safety seriously. I left. Their response was useless, so I asked for a refund of my annual fee. I said if I saw the man there again, I would call the police and I would use their name. The manager's face went tight. He said he could cancel my membership and process a prorated amount. He asked me to confirm my address. He said again they couldn't identify someone from a description alone. I signed a form and handed over my key tag. When I walked out, I didn't look back at the rows of bikes. That afternoon, I searched for another facility. I picked one across town in a strip mall near a grocery store and a credit union. The parking lot had cameras pointed at the spaces. The front desk called everyone by first name. I started going there in the mornings before work, when the place was bright and loud. I kept my routine simple. I parked near the door, checked in, lifted, and left. About a month later, on a Wednesday, a friend texted me a link with a photo and a short line. "Is this your guy?" I tapped it. The article headline said a serial stalker had been arrested in our area. The photo showed a man in a gray t-shirt, tired eyes, short hair. The name under the image was Derek Anderson. I recognized him. It was the man from the gym. My friend sent another message with a screenshot of the paragraph that mattered. It said he had been following female gym members to their cars and to their homes, keeping detailed records of their routines and personal information. I read it twice. The piece said he was in custody and that police were asking for other potential victims to come forward. The article included a contact line for the department. I called it. A receptionist answered and transferred me to a detective who gave his name slowly and spelled it. I explained I had an encounter with Derek at a gym about a month earlier, and that I had a canceled membership there. The detective asked me to describe the gym layout, the time, the machines, the parking lot, and the way he entered my car. He asked if there were any witnesses or cameras. I told him about the light pole and the front desk, and the open door alarm, and the part where he laughed. He asked if Derek had touched me. I told him about the wrist grab and how I started the car. He said they had served a warrant on Derek's apartment. They had found notebooks. 47 women were listed with addresses, work schedules, and daily routines. He said Derek had attacked 3 women near their homes. He said the attacks were at night and near parking areas or porches. He asked if I would give a formal statement. I said yes. We set a time at the station. At the station, the lobby had plastic chairs and a vending machine that hummed. The detective met me in a small room with a table and a recorder. He turned it on and said the date and time. I told the story again, in order. I kept it to what happened. He asked for the exact phrases Derek used, the distance between the bikes, the angle of the mirror, how long he sat at each place. He took notes. He asked if Derek said my name. I said no. He asked if Derek mentioned my car model. I said no, just the food places. He said my statement helped establish a pattern of predatory behavior. Approach at the gym, escalation in the parking lot, attempt to gain control in the car. He said it matched other reports and backed the case for premeditation. He told me Derek targeted women who worked out alone in the evenings. He used the gym as a hunting ground. He would watch, follow to the lot, and then decide if he could tail them home. He said my action of backing out had likely prevented him from learning my address. He asked if I had changed my habits. I said yes. I kept it short. I signed the statement. He gave me a card with a case number and said they might call me to testify. He walked me out to the lobby. On the board near the door, there was a flyer that said, "If you see something, say something." I put the card in my wallet and left. I switched to group classes at the new facility and never went alone. If I stayed late at work, I skipped the gym. I parked under cameras and used the main door. I kept my phone in a pocket and my keys in my hand. I told the new staff why I wanted a buddy to walk out with. They said they could do that. I read a follow-up article the next week. It listed the charges and said the notebooks were now evidence. It said there were lines of times and addresses and small notes about hair color and vehicles. The number was still 47. When the court date came into the news, the detective called to update me. I didn't have to appear. My statement was in the file. He said Derek had entered a plea in one of the assault cases. He said the judge had denied bail. He kept it factual. I thanked him. I set the phone down and went on with my day. I drive past the old gym every few weeks on my way to the grocery store. The crooked light pole is still there. The windows show the rows of bikes and the mirror wall. I don't go inside. I don't need more from that place. I use the new gym with people I know. I check my surroundings. I lock my car. I keep it simple. It's not complicated after you see how someone like that works. He watched people who were busy counting reps and minutes. He waited for empty spaces and open doors. He used normal places to do unnormal things, quiet and steady, so no one looked twice. Now, I don't give anyone the quiet space to do that with me. I don't wait to see if someone is being friendly, or if I am being dramatic. I take the action I can control. I never work out alone anymore. Sometimes the people who seem like they're just being friendly are actually planning something much more sinister.